Is everybody's chat set to private? As I'm getting myself going here, will you guys tell me in a private chat, what duties do we owe the buyer in an oral buyer agency agreement? What do I owe the buyer in an oral buyer agency agreement? Private chat. Good morning. What do we owe the buyer in oral buyer agency? Good morning. If you're just joining us, we're in a private chat. And you're telling me in a private chat, what duties do we owe the buyer if we are in an oral buyer agency agreement? Everybody in? Good morning. When we are in an oral buyer agency agreement, we owe that buyer OCAR. The word oral means nothing in this case. What kind of agency are we talking about? Buyer agency. And in buyer agency, what do I owe the buyer? OCAR. Whenever you guys see oral buyer agency, what I want you to do is cover up that word oral. That's how important that word is. Everybody with me? We don't have it in writing yet, but we have created a relationship. It's an express agreement, which means the terms have been clearly stated. So where we left each other in a rush last week was we're in the unit 7 material, the online learning system. And what we have in here is a sample oral buyer agency letter. This is not an agreement in any way. I'm not asking the buyer to sign anything. Everybody say it with me. What do we document? Everything. So if you're having this conversation with the buyer about creating buyer agency and you're doing it verbally, I need you to follow up with an email, right? Because we're documenting that conversation. We're documenting that we created that oral buyer agency agreement. This is just a sample letter. This is some firms may provide this sample letter for you to use. This will eliminate all that typing for you. But this is a letter from the firm, from the broker, to the buyer. So I look forward to working with you. As we discussed during our review of working with real estate agent disclosure, a buyer has several choices on how a firm will work with the buyer. You have indicated your preference that I begin working with you as a buyer's agent under an unwritten agreement, which is permitted up to a certain point. The purpose of this letter is to confirm the most important terms of our agreement. Good. Hey, Sierra. And then you have some bullet points that go over things like, I'm going to, work with you. I'm going to help you find property. We can talk about things like dual agency. We can do everything that we would do if we had this thing in writing, but we're not requiring it to be in writing yet. And then at the bottom here, you can see that the agent signs it. Again, this is your documentation. This is your backup. This is something you can put in their hands. So as we discussed the other day, and we've seen these slides, you guys already have these, but I do just want to go through it again really quick to make sure we're all on the same page. Because as the slide indicates, this tends to be a problem topic. And I think the easiest way for us to get through it is just pretend that that word oral doesn't exist. So I'm in a buyer agency agreement. What do I owe this buyer? OCAR. Now, where does the word oral come into place? In an oral buyer agency agreement, what do they owe me? Not a thing. They don't owe me anything because I don't have anything in writing. Remember, I'm the professional in this relationship, right? I'm the one driving this transaction. I can provide the services. I can't make you commit in an oral buyer agency. So how do we get away with this? Because it's express. An express agreement means that the terms have been clearly stated. We can't just start acting like a buyer's agent without having the conversation. We just can't start acting like an agent. That would be an implied agreement. So we can get through oral buyer agency with an express agreement, meaning the terms have been clearly stated. And we've got to have this thing in writing by the time that I'm ready to present. And please make note of that word. By the time I'm ready to present an offer on someone's behalf. I cannot present an offer. I can write an offer under an oral buyer agency agreement, but I cannot present. On your notes, I would write versus present. Again, different ways your test likes to trick you up. I can write up an offer, but I cannot present it to the seller or the listing agent on your behalf under an oral agreement. We're getting more into our written agency agreements in just a minute when we get into Unit 8. And one thing we're going to learn about those written agency agreements is they determine how I'm going to get paid. So if we don't have anything in writing, what's my compensation? Zero, nothing. So how can I ensure, before I present this offer on your behalf, how can I ensure that we will continue on with this relationship? And at the end of the day, at the end of the transaction, I'll get paid because we put it in writing before we present. All matters of compensation, all agreements to compensation, discussion about commission, any and all agreements to our payments have got to be in writing before we present an offer. Agreement to do or not to do dual agency has to be in writing before we present the offer. I think what I'm saying is all of the terms of agency have to be agreed on and writing before we're ready to present the offer. The things that oral buyer agency can't be, it can't be exclusive. I cannot demand exclusivity. You may also see verbiage that says non-exclusive. Oral buyer agency is non-exclusive, which means they can date as many firms as they want. There may not just be talking to me. It might be that this is what the buyer's looking for, and the first one that finds it, wins. The other thing it can't be under oral buyer agency, I cannot put a time limit on our relationship. So what we're saying here, you guys, is if I demand exclusivity or I attempt to put a time limit on our relationship, then I got to get it in writing. If I'm not demanding exclusivity, if I'm not putting a time limit on it, I can work with oral up until the time that we're ready to present the offer on their behalf. I think the other thing we said the other day, I hear you. I totally hear you guys. And some of you are sitting there and you're saying, why would I spend all this time with a buyer if I'm not guaranteed commission? Why am I spending all this time with a buyer if I can't make them commit? And I hear you loud and clear. Guys, there's no commission rule that says that we have to work as an oral buyer agent. You may affiliate with a firm that doesn't allow oral buyer agency, which means you can't do anything for this buyer if they don't sign. You, your own independent contractor self, your own broker may decide you don't want to do this, and that's fine. There's no rule that says that we have to. I need you guys to get out of your own way. Your test is not going to ask you how you are going to work with buyers. Your test is going to ask you, can you work under an oral buyer agency agreement at first? And the answer to that is yes. So please put your own personal feelings about this off to the side until you get out there in the wild and you're working with buyers. But until then, to get through the test, again, I beg you guys, I know this doesn't sit well. I hear you. But to get you through your exams, yes, we can work with an oral buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement at first. Then we went through the what ifs real quick. What if you're ready to present that offer? You got it written up, you got your buyer to sign it, and you are ready to contact the listing agent, and you look at that buyer and say, I need you to sign this buyer agency agreement. And the buyer says, nope, not going to do it. Can I make anybody do anything? I've yet to figure out how. I'm still trying to figure out how I can make people do stuff, but I can't. So I can't make anybody do anything. So we have some options. We can create buyer agency just for one property. So I could create a written buyer agency agreement just for 123 Main Street. So I can present that offer on your behalf. If it gets accepted, I'm your guy. If it doesn't get accepted, we still have an oral buyer agency relationship. Us as the broker at that point, if they're still not willing to sign for one property, we may need to revisit some conversations. Is it a matter of trust? Is it a matter of uncertainty? Why is it that they're unwilling to sign? Does that make sense? Especially if you've been with them for, a couple months or something. If working with that just one property doesn't work, then we can also, the last ditch effort is to offer to downgrade them from a client to a customer. And remember, when we downgrade them, my role switches. I can't be a buyer's agent anymore. My role is going to switch to a seller sub-agent. And as a seller sub-agent, whose best interest do I now have? I can see your mouths move. Whose best interest do we now have? The seller. So I need to let my buyer know, if you want this downgrade, fine. You don't want to sign buyer agency, awesome. Our next option is to downgrade you. But if I downgrade you, I'm the one changing. My role is changing from a buyer's agent to a seller sub-agent. And that buyer needs to know that those things that you told me when you were a client, once I downgrade you, once I make that switch, who's my duty to? The seller. I need that conversation in writing as well. Can we agree to that? Why that conversation needs to go in writing? Oh, and not just the things I know about you, but specifically, I know your price point, I know your motive, and I know your terms. So once we downgrade, this is the information I need to share with the seller. Buyer's probably not going to like that, huh? By the way, we call this second bullet point a last ditch effort because honestly, I don't think the real estate commission wants us to get into the habit of switching people from seller sub-agent to agent and from buyer's agent. I don't think they want us moving people around in our plane. So bottom line, I think if we're explaining these rules properly out the gate and given the consumer options then from the beginning, then they will understand what it is that they're signing up. They will understand where in their plane they're going. What do we get if we become a sub-agent? Am I guessing no commission? Now remember, in order for me to become a seller sub-agent, the seller and the listing firm has to agree to work with me. And if they agree to work with me as a seller sub-agent, that's going to be in MLS with an offer of compensation. But if I'm wanting to write this up, before I offer that downgrade, and that's a great point, thank you. Before I offer that downgrade, I need to look in MLS and make sure I'm allowed to proceed in that type of relationship, that the listing firm will allow me to bring my buyer customer. Because if the listing firm won't allow me, I mean, you can always pick up the phone and call and ask if they'll consider it, right? But if the listing firm doesn't allow me to come in as a seller sub-agent, the listing firm doesn't allow me to bring a buyer customer, then I don't have that option to downgrade that buyer. So what we're saying here, guys, bottom line, I only got two choices to work with clients, to work with consumers. You're either my client or my customer. So if you say no to putting this thing in writing, even if it's for one address, nope, I'm not going to sign anything. All right, you want to do the downgrade? No, I don't want to do a downgrade. I'm out. They said no to being my client. They said no to being my customer. Those are the only two options we have. And if they say no, then we're not going to present that offer. I can't, because they've said no to both being a client and a customer. Questions on this? As a broker in an oral buyer agency relationship, we may need still to talk about dual agency. If this buyer under an oral agreement wants to see something that your firm has listed, then we need to get their consent, even orally, to even show the property. And again, we're going to have that written agreement to do dual agency before we present the offer. All agency agreements must be complete and in writing before we can present the offer to our buyers or sellers. So if they have originally said no to dual agency orally, they said, no, I'm not going to do dual. Great. Then something comes listed, something comes on the market that your firm has listed, and they say, ooh, I want to see that one. Okay, well, you originally told me no to dual. So we need to revisit this dual conversation. They can change their mind orally because they originally agreed not to do dual orally. You can make a change orally if the agreement was done orally, of course, documenting everything. If the consent is in writing, so if you do, for example, maybe the seller has said no to dual agency, and now we have an interested buyer represented by the firm. We can always revisit dual agency with the seller. If they change their mind, because it is in writing, the only way to change it is in writing. And I believe this is about where we left the other day. Again, post haste, I know, which is why I wanted to kind of come back and revisit this. Basic contract law. Contract law 101 says, once we have an agreement of any type in writing, the only way to legally change it is in writing. So if the seller has said no, and then they change their mind, we got to get that change in writing. What questions do we have on oral buyer agency, oral dual agency? The rest of Unit 7, starting on page 175, talking about the nature of the brokerage business, independent contractor versus employee. The last of Unit 7 is no longer tested, so I've removed it from this section. However, I still think this is important because I think you guys need this information. So I encourage you guys to read 175 through 177. Guys, anywhere it talks about the broker, I think you should read that. I'm going to mention this. We're going to talk about this, I guess, in a week or so, when we talk about your applying for your state exam and affiliating with your firm and all that good stuff. So we'll have that conversation. Once we get through Unit 10, we'll talk about your application process, what you need to know. I got you. What you need to know to go for your state exam, that kind of stuff. And we'll move that conversation there at that point. But yeah, you're no longer tested on 175 to the end of Unit 7. So I guess what I'm saying is that gets us through Unit 7. Yes, ma'am. You can either unmute or type, whichever. So while she's doing that, you're on mute. Are you talking to me? You're on mute.
I'm sorry, good morning. I was reading over the real estate commission agency and agreement disclosure. And one of I think it was O, yeah, it was O. It's like French to me, and I just don't quite understand it. The 104, A0104 agency
Yeah.
disclosure.
I'll come back to this in just a second, guys. Let's go see. So it is down here in Julie. And it is 58A.0104. And which one is it? Oh, you said?
Oh, yes, I put a question mark just so I can ask just a brief explanation on it, because I just don't, it's just not making sense to me.
So a broker who is selling property in which the broker has an ownership shall not undertake to represent a buyer of that property except if it's commercial. So what that's saying, Regina, is if I am the owner, my name is on the deed, and I'm acting as the listing agent. I can wear two hats in this situation. I can list the property that I own. And
Okay,
because my name is on the deed, I can't represent the buyer in this transaction.
okay,
That's a conflict of interest because Old Car says I should have that buyer's best interest in mind. Yes. But let's be really honest. If my name's on the deed, whose best interest do I actually have?
me.
Mine all day long, right? So that's not fair to the buyer. Now, somebody else in my firm could represent that buyer, right? So they could say, yeah, that's fine. You can let Regina, that's fine. Full disclosure, right? So they know Regina works with the owner. She works with the seller. But another agent in the firm can represent the buyer. The second piece of that, the exception kind of is if it's commercial property. If you're selling commercial property and you have less than a 25% interest, then you can represent the buyer in that transaction as long as you go into that with full disclosure.
Okay.
I have an ownership interest, 24.99%. Do you wish to proceed? And if they say no, totally respect that, totally give that.
Okay.
Did that answer?
Yes, thank you so much. Very much.
Of course. I know, guys, listen, rule is no fun. Law is no fun. So it's, and I don't want y'all to the point where you're banging your head on the desk or anything. And that's why we're breaking it up into chunks. And, please feel free to reach out. So those unit 7, those key terms, guys, unit 7, what do we spend? A week plus in unit 7, little over a week, little better part of 2+ classes. What's that tell you about unit 7? Kind of important, hey? There's a reason we spent so much time in unit 7, and unit 7 101 says know what the words mean. Remember, you guys are preparing for an application exam, which means you're going to take a scenario and apply it. And if you don't know what the word means, you don't know what it is you're applying. So those key terms, the key point review is a great review. Again, don't use the review as a supplement for the entire unit. The review alone is not enough. The review just kind of, last minute, quick review. And then you got that student quiz on unit 7. We are minutes away from getting started into unit 8. So we're pretty much taking our agency discussion, what we've learned so far, and we're going to expand on it. Unit 8 gets more into the in practice of it. So we're going to specifically talk about working with sellers. We're going to specifically talk about working with buyers. And we're going to talk about those agency agreements, those agency contracts. Before we do that, though, let's Kahoot. Y'all grab your phones. And I got us a quick unit 7 review. Kind of give us an opportunity to review. And I say it's quick because this Kahoot is just true and false. So you got a 50-50 shot. With that being said, I encourage you to take a second and answer to the best of you can. This is going to help you determine, again, Kahoot's very basic because I'm limited on my characters. So it's a very basic understanding. But what I say to you guys is if you don't understand or you're not getting the Kahoot question, take a screenshot of it so you know to go back and review it, go back and revisit it. So there's your QR code for this true and false unit 7 Kahoot. If you're going through the website or the app, then you need a game pin. The game pin is different each Kahoot. So this game pin is 259839. And again, if you don't want to play on your phone, that's fine. I just ask that you at least play in your mind. Again, we're just trying to sum it up and make sure that we have this basic understanding. Thank you. A few more seconds if anybody else wants to join, anybody else wants to play. Anybody in that wants to play on your phone? All right, true and false, Unit 7. Question number 1. Fiduciary is a relationship based on trust. And that is true. That's exactly what it's based on. It's the principal/client that trusts that when they enter into an agency agreement with me, that I'm going to have their best interest. And that's what we're saying by that fiduciary. Did y'all hear just what I said? It's the principal and client. Who gets that fiduciary? You got to enter into an agency relationship with me. Once we enter into that agency relationship, that makes you my client. And that's what agency is all about. I am putting myself out there in a way to represent this party. And as a representative of this party, they should trust that I have their best interest. They should trust that everything I do is because that's what's best for them. And that's what that fiduciary is. Questions on this one? Let's see who got it. Oh, let's see who got it right the fastest. Alini was out the board first, followed by Anna, Stacy, Shauna, and Dustin. Question number 2, true or false? Agency is defined by consumers based on their expectations and experiences. Agency is defined by consumers. That is false. That is correct. It's false. Agency is defined by the common law of agency. It's defined by court rulings. It's defined by license law, and it's defined by commission rule. So agency is defined by several different sources. Could y'all imagine the chaos if we let the consumers drive this ship, fly this plane based on what they think, what they want? We would have no standards. We would have no limits. Does that make sense? So agency, we are the ones that are practicing agency based on common law of agency, contract law, license law, and commission rule. Questions on this one? So Stacy's on top, Alini's still on the board, Lauren's on the board, Shauna's still on, and Sam is on the board. Question number 3, true or false? In North Carolina, licensees may act as transactional brokers. Transactional brokerage in North Carolina is not allowed, also known as facilitator broker, transactional/facilitator. The transactional broker's best interest is the transaction. Can we take a play on words there? Can we see that? And in a transactional relationship where my best interest is the transaction, I don't have any clients. Both parties are customers. In order for us to be involved, somebody has to hire a broker. It may not be that they hired you. Remember, you can proceed as a seller sub-agent, but somebody has to have hired the listing firm. So in order for us to be involved, somebody has to hire a broker. And that's what the transactional broker is. Nobody has hired a broker. Nobody has hired a firm. And in North Carolina, we can't proceed. And this comes up, you know, again, I always say it's not the public's job to know my job, but they may have a situation. I had a teammate call not too long ago, just late last year, and said he had somebody, an unrepresented buyer that was interested in a for sale by owner. And I don't know how they got to him, but they called him, and they really, all they wanted him for was the paperwork. Nobody wanted to hire him. They just wanted him for the contract. It's a heck of a lot cheaper than hiring an attorney to draft up a contract on their behalf if they don't have brokers in the transaction. He said, can I work with this FSBO, an unrepresented buyer? And I said, no, somebody's got to hire you in order for you to proceed. So we have standards. You're not getting access to my forms until we're in some kind of, somebody's in an agency agreement. Questions on this one? Again, transactional is also known as a facilitator. You are facilitating the transaction, not the people. All right, see what this did. Lainey's back on top. Stacy and Sean are still on one. May's on the board. Pinky's on the board. And Kazier is our highest climber. I apologize if I butchers y'all's names. It's our highest climber, up 7 places this round. Question number 4. An agent must be loyal and obedient to a customer. Read that again. Why is it false? Who gets obedience? That's it. Who gets obedience and loyalty and confidentiality and accounting and reasonable skill, care, and diligence? Is it the customer? No, it is the client. The client gets old car. The customer gets, let's do this together. The customer gets honesty, fairness, and the disclosure material facts. And that's it. Questions on this one? Let's see what that did. Lainey and Stacy are still on to, I had it. Dayosh? No? Sorry. Is on the board. Regina's on the board. Pinky, I do apologize. 4 of you lost your answer streak. That's okay. We'll get it back. We'll get it back. Question number 5. Dual agency involves 2 firms helping buyers and sellers through a transaction. How many firms in dual agency? Everybody can show me. That's what's wrong with that one. Dual agency is 1 firm. How many transactions? 1 transaction. How many clients? Dual agency is how many clients? 2. Bonus question. How many customers in dual agency? 0. Everybody's in first class. Dual agency is one firm, one transaction. What do I mean by a transaction? I'm talking about 123 Main Street. The seller is selling 123 Main Street. The buyer is buying 123 Main Street. We're talking about the same property. 2 clients, 0 customers. Maybe it's one agent, one broker working with both buyer and seller, single agent, dual agency. Maybe it is 2 brokers, one working with the buyer, the seller. Questions on this one? Delini's staying on. Kazia is on the board. Pierre's up. Stacy's still on. Shauna's back. Looks like a couple of you lost your combo breaker, your answer streak. That's all right. Let's get it back right now. Question number 6. A provisional broker can be in dual agency opposite their broker in charge. Read it again. Can they be in dual? Everybody write this down for me. This is the problem topic in Unit 7. The BIC and the PB cannot be designated opposite of each other. They can be in dual together. Because dual agency is about whom? And only about the firm. They can be in dual together. This is the number 1 problem topic in Unit 7. They can be in dual together. They cannot be designated. Questions? Everybody see that? Dual, yes. Designated, no. I feel like I should have some questions here.
I do have a question.
Please.
So is that because in dual agency, since you're working with both of them, then you're on both sides, so y'all can work together, because with designated, then you're more exclusive.
That's
And so you can't
exactly it. That's
mix with
exactly it,
other-
Victoria. So in dual, the firm, and I'm getting requests to repeat. So here we go. This is what dual agency looks like. The firm and all of the agents are straddling the wall. The buyer's buying, the seller's selling, and the firm and all of the agents, because dual agency is about the firm. And the firm and dual agency has to represent both parties equal loyalty. Doesn't matter if you're a single agent, dual agent, or if there are 2 of you acting as dual agency. Dual agency is about the firm. In designated, as Victoria said, one of the agents or one of the brokers gets kicked off the wall to work, here's that word, exclusively with the buyer. And a different agent gets kicked off the wall to work exclusively with the seller. Designated dual agency brings exclusivity back to the transaction. It brings back to our football game. Remember, we're changing roles from the coach to the referee. We're back to the coach. So question comes in. They can be in dual because dual is about the firm. There is no exclusivity. We got 2 choices. I can either be a buyer's agent or we can be in dual. I can either be a listing agent or we can be in dual. It depends on the relationship with the firm. In designated, that exclusivity comes back. The other important thing to know here, what happened to the firm and all the other agents? When we kicked 2 of you off the wall and designated you, what happened to the firm and all the other agents? Did they fall off the wall too? No. So in designated, dual is not eliminated. In designated, dual still remains. The firm and all the other agents are still in dual. So the question is, yes to dual, no to designated. The PB and the BIC can be in dual. Yes, because dual is about what? Whom? Let me see everybody's mouth move. Dual is about what? The firm. And designated, because of the nature of the relationship of the BIC and the PB. If the BIC is managing their provisional broker, if they're managing their PBs, they know something about the other side going into this. So because of the nature of their relationship, they can't be designated opposite of each other. What other questions do we have? Let's see what that did. Kazia's on top. Lauren's on the board. Eleni's still on. Regina and Pinky are on. Kelly, or Kel, excuse me, is our highest climber this round, up 5 places. And the last one, in agency, the principals does not owe any duties to the agent/broker. And that is false. Our agency agreements are a two-way street, which means both parties have duties and obligations to each other. In agency, I owe you old car. What does the principal owe me? They have to act in good faith. They can't hinder my efforts. And they also owe me compensation. Maybe they're paying me. Maybe they're agreeing to let the other party pay me. But they owe me that assurance of compensation and to act in good faith. Questions on this one? Let's see what we got. What's our podium winners here? 3rd place, we have Pinky. Came up a few more. In 2nd place, we have Eleni. And in 1st place, we have Lauren. Lauren came out of the gate there. I got 4th and 5th runners up of Kazaa and Stephanie. Question comes in. Who is the principal? The principal is another name for the client. The principal and the client are used interchangeably. They are the ones that hire us. How do they hire us? Through the use of an agency agreement. What's an agency agreement? That's where we're heading next in Unit 8. Questions? All right. I know we're a few minutes early for break, but I really hate to get started on a new unit for just what, 5 minutes and then say, okay, let's take a break. So let's go ahead and take 10 and we come back. Oh dear. Okay. When we come back, we are jumping into Unit 8. I got a question in on the chat over break, and I was trying to respond, but my chat's being funny, Zoom's being funny. So anyway, the question is, for some reason, I was thinking the client doesn't owe us anything. That's an oral agency only. So if we have those written agreements, once they're in writing, and I just made myself a note to go back and revisit that Kahoot question to make sure that's worded properly. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. But you're right. In an oral agreement, they owe me absolutely nothing. But once we put that thing in writing, they're going to ensure my commission, and they're going to, they can't hinder my efforts. So thank you for that. And I don't pretend like I know how Zoom works. So I don't know. For some reason, I can't private chat with you guys. I don't know. So we're back. So let me go ahead, do screenshots for attendance. We used to say everybody say cheese, but my firm did we did a photo shoot shot a couple years ago, and the photographer had us all say money, because it's virtually impossible to say money without smiling. So money, when somebody's taking your picture, try it. Say money. You can't do it. It's hard. Because what do we love? I mean, we like cheese too, but what do we like more than cheese? Money. So whatever makes you smile bigger, brighter, right? All right. So we are jumping into Unit 8. Again, still on agency. But just switching gears just a bit. Like I said, this unit's more of the in practice. So understand, we understood and created agency in Unit 7. We did our working with real estate agent disclosures. We had these conversations. We understand the type of agency that your firm offers, et cetera, et cetera. Now here we are in Unit 8 coming into those agency contracts. So we're going to explain those agency agreements. We're going to talk about a North Carolina Act. Specifically, this is the North Carolina Residential Property Disclosure Act. So we'll talk about what this is and who it affects. We're going to describe specifically working with sellers and specifically working with buyers. And then the last piece, we get to pick up our calculators, but this is fun math, because at the end of Unit 8, we're going to help you learn how to calculate your commission. And then we're also going to learn how to calculate what the seller's going to receive. Once they sell their home and everybody's paid off, all those lien holders and the brokers and everybody's paid, whatever's left is the seller's net. So we're going to help the seller figure out how much. You guys think that's a common question that comes up in the listing agreement? If you sell my house for X amount, how much am I going to make? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a common question. So that's some of the other fun math we get to do. We won't see math today, though. Maybe Thursday. We'll have to wait and see. So before we jump in, this is a refresher. We've already seen this. But as we're getting into the contracts, we need to make sure we're good on the verbiage, on the terminology. So the contracts, both our agency agreements and our sales contract, call us the selling firm and the listing firm. So we need a good understanding that the selling agent, the selling firm is the one working with the buyer. The listing agent and the listing firm is the one working with the seller. Buyer's agent and seller's agent is the verbiage we use out on the streets. But we need to start getting familiar with the verbiage found in our forms, in our agency agreement and our sales contract. Another quick reminder, Commission Rule 58A.0104. We just looked at O together. Those agency agreements and disclosure. This is what the Real Estate Commission has to say about agency agreements and disclosure. And we can't, they're the ones that give you your test. We can't dispute them, because this is what it is. So again, I encourage you guys to read it, dissect it, work through it. And once you've read it, read it again. When you've read it a second time, what the heck, you're on a roll, right? Read it a third. The better understanding we have of agency, not only the better you'll do on your exams, but the better prepared you'll be for the real world. So a couple reminders there. So to begin Unit 8, we got to talk about these written agency agreements, not oral now, just on the written agency agreements. And our written agency agreements have 4 musts. What does must mean? Required, necessary, must be there. Everybody hear me? This is an important slide. Our written agency agreements must be signed by all parties. They will be signed by the buyer or seller, depending on if we're using the listing agreement or the buyer's agency agreement. They're also going to be signed by the broker on behalf of the firm. The firm is an entity. The firm is an LLC. The firm is not a physical body that can sign. So as a broker of the firm, we will be signing these agency agreements on behalf of our firm. Remember, my relationship between the broker and the firm is that of a general agent, which means we have some power, some ability to bind. And an example of the power that we have is to be able to sign this agency agreement on behalf of our firm. Because the broker is the one signing, another must is that we must include our license number. Once you guys get licensed, you'll be issued a 6-digit number. Go ahead and memorize it because you need it everywhere you go as a real estate agent. You might as well go ahead and put it on a flashcard and memorize that 6-digit number. So signed by all parties, buyer or seller, and the broker on behalf of the firm. Because the broker is the one signing it, anytime you sign anything as a broker, you need your license number. It's got to have a definite end date. We can't have an open-ended agency agreement. Maybe it's for a couple weeks, maybe it's for a couple months. The market can dictate the termination date. Your firm may have a policy on how long we want these agency agreements. Obviously, there's going to be concerns. The commission may have little red flags pop up on their end if we're trying to create agency for years. That's a long time to commit somebody. So it might be that you start with, I'm just making numbers up, you start with 6 months. And at the end of 6 months, if we haven't done anything, if I haven't done what you hired me to do, we can either terminate, we can always agree to extend. But the thing with these termination dates, you guys, because we have a definite end date, when they're over, they're over. And our agency agreements specifically say 11:59 p.m. on this date. So at 11:58, I'm your agent. At the stroke of midnight, I'm not, unless we agree to extend it. And then another must, we have to have the non-discrimination clause. The non-discrimination clause tells the consumer, the buyer or seller, that the broker nor the firm will discriminate against the protected classes. It goes on to list the protected classes. That's the non-discrimination provision. So it says we will not discriminate against the protected classes. Again, fair housing is coming up in Unit 19. So we will talk about those protected classes and what that means. There are other things that can be in our written agency agreements. These are the musts. If your firm, maybe you go out on your own and one day you are your own firm and you decide you don't want to use the standard forms that they provide for us to use, the pre-printed forms that we're getting ready to look at, you decide you want to hire an attorney to write your own agency agreement, and that's fine. You may choose to do that. But if you're going to do that, commission rule says that we still need these musts. If you're using the pre-printed forms, the standard forms, they got us covered. So our written agency agreements, the 4 musts. Agency agreements are employment contracts. We use the agency agreement for the client to hire the firm. And understand, when we're being hired to do a very specific job. Again, this isn't like open-ended employment. The use of the listing agreement employs me to list and sell, market and sell your property. The buyer's agency agreement employs me to help you select and purchase a property. The property management agreement employs me to manage your property. We're using them for a very specific purpose, but we're being hired to do that very specific job. Remember, the agency agreement is between the client and, remind me, see mouse move, the client and whom? The firm, the firm. So the client, buyer, or seller is hiring the firm to do this very specific job. Any agency agreement with an owner, may that owner be for sale or for lease, must be in writing from the beginning. This is different than what we just talked about with oral buyer agency, yes? So let's make sure we heard what I just said. Oral buyer agency. You can also have oral tenant agency. You cannot work with an owner. You can't perform a single service for an owner without having the agency agreement in writing. We must have agency agreements in writing from the owner, with the owner, before we can do anything. Buyer and tenant are the only ones that are allowed to be oral at first. Somebody says whoever's paying you, not necessarily. Not necessarily. I could be a buyer's agent being paid by the seller. So remember, my loyalty is not to the one that pays me. It's to the one that hires me. Now, to your point, and this is a great point, because it's an employment contract, all employment contracts have got to discuss how much I'm going to get paid once I do the job. And that takes us back to our Kahoot question. The principal is ensuring that I get paid. They may or may not be the one paying me, but they are ensuring, they are making sure that I get paid. So if they're not going to pay me, the other side is. Is that good? Yep, good. Thank you. Thank you. So let's talk specifically for a second about these listing agreements. Why are we going to use a listing agreement? Well, one reason we just said is because it's an employment contract. It hires me and allows me to act as that fiduciary for my seller. It ensures my compensation once I've done the job that I've been hired to do. It's an employment agreement. Another reason to use a listing agreement, though, is to create inventory. As a salesman, I need a product to sell. And if I currently don't have any listings, if I currently don't have any listing agreements, I don't have a product to sell right now, do I? So by using a listing agreement, a provision in the listing agreement is to allow this listing to go into the multiple listing services. And by going into the MLS, it creates inventory. It gives me product on my shelves to sell. It may not be that I'm the one listing it, but it creates that inventory within your MLS and allows you the opportunity to sell other firms' listings. So we're cooperating together. We may be different firms, but we also might be coming together for one common objective, and that's to connect buyer and seller. So we're creating inventory. We have this product to sell. So we got some laws that regulate how we can solicit business. This may be working with sellers. This may be working with buyers. What we're going to go over is the things that we can't do. I'm going to encourage you guys to think outside the box. How are you going to generate business? We'll touch back on that, but what we're focusing on right now are the things that we can't do, or the things that we need to be aware of before we're soliciting consumers. So up first, we got National Association of Realtors, that's NAR, National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics, says that I cannot solicit somebody else's active client. If I see a home listed for sale in the MLS, I can't solicit their client. They already have an agency relationship. How do I know that? Because their home is listed for sale in the MLS. Once it expires or is withdrawn, they're fair game, right? But while it is still active, while it is still in the multiple listing services, I know that they are in an agency relationship. I mean, could you imagine? I'm an agent and I'm scrolling through MLS and I'm going to look up and I'm going to see Cameron. And I see one of Cameron's listings and I see it's been on the market. Maybe I think the price is a little too high. I don't know. I'm making stuff up. But I have the audacity to call Cameron's sellers and say, if you fire him and hire me, I could sell your house for faster. How's Cameron feeling right now? How might his sellers be feeling right now? Not too good, right? Thank you, Cameron, for letting me pick on you. So because Cameron has it listed, I've got hands off. That's what that means, hands off. Flip that coin. Has anybody ever been to an open house and had the agent ask them if they're working with an agent? Why are they asking you that? Because I want to know if you are somebody's active client. If you come into my open house and I say, welcome, are you working with an agent? And they say yes, what that tells me is hands off. Somebody else happened to bring, to send their buyer to my open house. As a broker, when I send my buyers open housing, if my buyers go open housing, I send them with a stack of my business cards. So when that agent at the open house says, do you have an agent? My guys can say, well, bam, there she is. I want them calling me and not them, right? So I send them with a stack of business cards, so there's no question. But either way, once they say they are represented, hands off. So does this actually happen in the real world? I'm going to say it has, which is in the past, which is how it got built into the Realtors Code of Ethics. That seems shady and underhanded, doesn't it? And that's why we have a code of ethics. That's why we have a certain set of standards to keep us ethical. So what if you don't join the National Association of Realtors? Whether you join or not may or may not be up to your firm. But if you're not a member of NAR, you still can't get away with it. Trying to solicit somebody else's active listings may be considered tortious interference, which is just wrongfully interfering in somebody's business relationship. So if you're not a member of NAR, you're not held to the code of ethics, but that still doesn't mean that you can, because Cameron could quite easily take me to court and say for tortious interference, because I interfered with his business relationship. So everybody good on that one? Active clients, hands off. Another thing we need to be aware of when we're soliciting consumers, trying to get business. We need to honor the do not call rules and registry. There's a list that you can purchase. I do not know the cost, but there's a list that you can purchase that'll tell you who's on the do not call registry. If cold calling is the route you're going to go, cold calling is just going to the phone book, if y'all remember what those things are, and just randomly start calling people from the phone book or 411.com, whatever your source is. Before you go cold calling, you've got to get your hands on this registry. And if that person you're about to call is on the do not registry, they have already said they don't want you to call them. That's why they're on the do not call registry. So an active client have many brokers because they're in an oral agency agreement, and that is non-exclusive. That's the key word there, exclusive versus non-exclusive. So the do not calls, again, is managed by the FTC. If cold calling is the route you want to go, then you need to get your hands on this registry. Again, I don't know the cost. There are some exceptions to this rule. because it's oral. It's non-exclusive. Oral is non-exclusive. Some exceptions. I can call a former client for up to 18 months after our agency relationship is over. So I have your house listed for sale. It expires yesterday. I can call you today, and I can call you for up to 18 months. Or what that asterisk means is until they tell me to stop calling. So I can call you for up to 18 months because we formally had a relationship. But if you say, please stop calling me, I've got to honor your request. So your former client is on the do not call registry, but because you had a relationship, you can call them for up to 18 months or until they tell you to stop calling. A consumer with a soft inquiry. Maybe somebody comes into your open house and you ask them to sign the open house registry. Maybe they fill out the contact me page of your website and they provide your phone number. If a consumer gives you their phone number, even if they're on the do not call, I can call them for up to 3 months or until they tell me to stop calling. Does everybody hear that? Once they say, please stop calling me, we've got to honor that request. And then the third exception, you can call a for sale by owner only if you have a genuinely interested buyer. If the FSBO is on the do not call, you cannot call to solicit their business. Why are we calling these people? To solicit their business, to get their business. Soliciting consumers. So you have a buyer that's genuinely interested in a FSBO. The FSBO is on the do not call, but I can call them because I have a seriously interested buyer. You cannot call to solicit the listing if they're on the do not call. And you can't use your bestie to pretend to be a buyer to get your foot in the door. That's why I say genuinely interested buyer, seriously interested buyer. So, gee, Julie, what's the big deal? It's just a phone call. Fines for violating the do not call laws could result in up to $10,000 per violation. So if you make 3 calls today to somebody on the do not call and all 3 get turned in, you could be facing a $30,000. Everybody with me? $10,000 per violation. I don't know what the cost of the do not call registry, but I can promise you it's not $10,000. So if cold calling is the route you're going to go, it's worth looking into, checking out do not call registry.com. Don't do it now. Wait till after class. Is this only if you're a member of NAR? Nope, this is all of us. Good question. This is all of us. All brokers have to honor the do not call registry. Also mentioned in this section is if you're going to solicit via email or fax. The fax is coming back. The fax is making a comeback. Do I have anybody in the medical profession? You guys already might be dealing with faxes. I'm telling you right now, the fax is a lot more secure than my Gmail email. So the fax is making a comeback. Is it coming back to real estate? I don't know. But if you're going to go fax or email, the rule is you got to give them the option to unsubscribe. Anybody get junk emails and down at the bottom, teeny tiny, it's like font 1, and you got that link to unsubscribe. There's no regulation on how visible that is, but you do have to, and same thing with a fax. You have to give them the option to unsubscribe. And if they reply to your email and say, please remove me from your mailing, honor their request. So I've given you, I don't know, let's call it a list of things you can't do or a list of things that you need to be aware of before you do. Once you guys set your chat, set it to everyone. Let's pull your chats up for everyone. And why don't you tell everybody, we've talked about the things that we can't do. What are some things that we can do to solicit? What are some ideas? What are some things we can do to get business? That's what we're trying to do, is get business. How do we get buyers and sellers? Ooh. You guys. So let's see what we're getting. Workshops, I like it. There are new agent, I'm sorry, not new agent, first-time home buyer seminars, first-time home buyer workshops where you can go talk to an agent and a lender, everybody involved. Door to door, I'm seeing that come up quite a bit. If you're going door to door, always be safe. Safety is always first. If the neighborhood, the entrance to the neighborhood has a sign that says no soliciting, you can't go knock on those doors, right? Because the subdivision, the neighborhood has just said no soliciting. So door to door, safety first. Postcards, yeah, social media, educational classes. One of my agents just did I just mentioned first-time home buyers. One of my agents just did a last time home buyers seminar. So the kids have moved out, we're selling that big house, we're downgrading, and hopefully this will be the last. So there's different markets of buyers out there, absolutely, to help educate. Social media, signs, postcards, we could do some mailings, word of mouth. I think you're one place for you guys to start, and it's too early, don't start yet, but I'm just kind of giving you food for thought. Y'all want some free advice for the day? A great place to start to solicit business is with the people that you already know. Back in my administrative days, I did new agent training. So I got you guys right when you got licensed, and I gave you homework assignment. I gave homework assignments back then too. And the homework assignment I gave to my new agents was to take a piece of paper and write down 1 through 100, and then list 100 people you know. Because if you know 100 people, don't those 100 people know 100 people? And don't those 100 people know 100 people? So it might not be that your immediate family wants to buy or sell, but by letting your immediate family know that you're buying or selling, they can go to work, they can talk to friends. Does that make sense? So a great place to start is with who you already know. By the way, with that list, the first 40, 50, 60, 70 is kind of easy. And then after that, you start stretching. You're like, well, I know my dentist. Well, guess what? The dentist has to have somewhere to live too, right? What about my mailman? Well, they have to. So it kind of forces you to stretch. Again, you can take that advice for what it's worth. If you are currently on a piece of paper writing 1 through 100, I ask you to stop and do that after class. Fair enough, but it might be something for you guys to consider. Who's your center of influence? Who do you know? Networking events, referrals. Yes, I'm telling you guys right now, seasoned agents that have been in the business for 30 years, they're not out prospecting. Their business today is from referrals from past clients. They worked long and hard to build this book of clientele. And now that they do, they can use those resources, those referrals, that word of mouth. They can use those resources to get business as well. So I think we're good. You guys got a pretty good handle on this. Absolutely. You can talk to anybody. I'm getting questions about specific. You can talk to anybody. All you have to do is say, hey, guess what? I have a license now. So if you or anybody you know, have them call me. I'll help them out. You may need to tell them a couple times because people forget, right? So, you know, your immediate family, those that you talk to every day, is going to be reminded, but you need to touch base with everybody else as well. Maybe once a quarter, you know, send them a holiday card, something to remind them that you're in the business. So yeah. The other source, don't rule out your out of state family and friends. I can only do transactions in North Carolina, but you know what? I can refer you to an agent anywhere else in the country and get paid a referral fee. And this is what that foreign broker is referring to. You have to have an active license in the state you're going to work. You can't go to that other state to conduct business. So if I refer somebody to an agent in South Carolina. Maybe they want to buy at Myrtle Beach. I can refer that person to an agent in South Carolina, can get paid a referral fee, which is negotiable. And then I can't go to South Carolina to conduct real estate business. I gotta respect that space. I gotta respect that even though I sent the referral, I'm still not licensed in South Carolina. That's why I sent the referral. So don't discount, don't eliminate your out-of-state family and friends as well. Questions? Cool. Another thing, rule to be aware of is how we cooperate amongst each other, brokers and firms. And Sherman's Antitrust Act gives us a couple specifics. By the way, Sherman's Antitrust Act is not specific to real estate. However, because of things that fall under Sherman Antitrust Act, the whole purpose of Sherman's Antitrust Act is to prohibit monopolies. We don't want one firm, one broker dominating. It's a market, you guys. And in a market, everybody should be able to come play. Everybody should be able to come and conduct their business. So if we're allowing monopolies, if anything is dictating that, that's where Sherman Antitrust Act kicks in. Specific to real estate, some things that apply about the Antitrust Act. Price fixing. Price fixing says that the firm determines what commission they expect to collect when they help you buy or sell your home. The firm determines it. It is not a standard fee. Some firms charge more, some firms charge less. This is the whole gist of that NAR settlement that we've touched on. NAR doesn't set our commission. Your local board of realtors doesn't set our commission. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Nobody can tell the firm what to charge. It's up to the firm what they're going to charge a seller, up to the firm what they're going to charge the buyer. Commission should be negotiable between the firm and the client. How negotiable? That needs to be spelled out in your firm's policy. When you go to that listing appointment, one of the questions the seller's going to ask you is, how much commission do you charge? I need you to pause and think about how you're going to respond to that question. Your response is, my firm charges X amount. Do not look at that seller and say, all of us in the triad charge the same amount. You just engaged in price fixing. You need to be very, very clear that the firm determines the commission. Once the seller asks you how much, of course, the next question out of their mouth is going to be, is that negotiable? Is your commission negotiable? And how you respond to that is up to your firm's policy. Do you have wiggle room in that commission? Now, with that being said, the whole gist of this lawsuit, this whole thing started, and I don't want to get down this rabbit hole, so we're just going to a couple minutes and then we got to move on. But this whole thing started because the MLSs had a required field of a commission to a buyer's agent. So typically speaking, the seller pays the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with whomever brings the buyer. And MLS required us to put an amount in to offer a buyer's agent. Even if it was $1, you could put an amount in to offer the buyer's agent. And sellers said, whoa, 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 whoa. Why am I being forced to pay for the person that's bringing me my competition? Why am I being forced to pay a commission to the agent that's bringing the buyer? And I will tell you one result of this lawsuit already. MLSs across the country will now allow you to put in 0. The way the conversation with that seller at that listing appointment needs to go is, and always should have been, my firm, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, will charge you X amount to list and sell your home. It's up to you how much you would like to pay a buyer's agent, if any. We can't force the sellers to pay a buyer's agent's commission. We never should have, but evidently we were. And so now MLS allows a big 0. We've got to have that conversation. I'm telling you right now, my firm's going to charge you X amount if you want me to list your house. That's the firm's policy. It's up to you how much you want to charge a buyer's agent, how much you want to pay a buyer's agent. The sellers need to be given that option. And I think that's the big picture of this whole thing. I'm already starting to see and try at MLS, buyer's agents being offered a commission of 0. So if the listing firm's not going to pay me, who will? If the seller's not going to pay me, who will? The buyer. And when we look, I only got 2 parties to the transaction. So if one's not going to do it, we got to look at the other one left. Everybody with me? When we look at our agency agreements, we're going to see that our commission is spelled out and always has been spelled out in our listing agreement and our buyer's agency agreement. So we'll see that breakdown with both. Again, lots more to come on that settlement. I do know that's one change is the 0 in MLS now. You can't even force the sellers to pay you $1 if they don't want to. We got to give them that option. And if the seller can't or won't pay you, that's why we have a buyer's agency agreement to ensure you get paid. So price fixing. The important thing to know, the important thing to understand is that how much we charge is the firm's policy, and you guys need to be very, very careful about how you address that, how you word that. It's your firm's policy. And yes, when you affiliate with your firm, they'll tell you, they'll let you know, they'll have these conversations with you. Questions on price fixing, not trying to get down that rabbit hole of the NAR settlement, but that's exactly what it's revolving around. I have heard that from several people, Shauna, and it's always been this case, but to your point, now they're forcing it. And I agree. Another thing under Sherman's Antitrust Act, we got to avoid group boycotting. Group boycotting is 2 or more brokers or firms coming together for the intent of pushing somebody out of the market. Maybe we're coming together, we're going to talk bad about a smaller real estate firm. They don't have the people, they don't have the resources, they don't have the power. Don't mess with them, they can't help you. We can't push people out of the market. Remember, it's a market and everybody should be allowed to play in the market. Let's say your buyer hires a home inspector and the home inspector just didn't do a good job. The report's not great. Things are missing. It's not a good experience. You may choose not to recommend that home inspector to your next buyer. You don't have to suggest that home inspector. That's okay. What you can't do is go to the office and say, y'all, so-and-so is horrible. Let's all agree none of us are going to use him. That would be group boycotting. We're working together to push this home inspector out of the market. Trust me, if the home inspector's that bad, they will work themselves out of the market. They don't need your help. Maybe the home inspector had a bad day. Does anybody else ever have a bad day? It happens, right? We can't work together. That's what group boycotting says. And then the third thing here is allocating or dividing the markets. My license says I can work anywhere as long as the property is located in North Carolina. And I can do residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, doesn't matter, as long as the property is located in North Carolina. Where I choose to work is up to me. That's a choice for me to make. Dividing the market would be if, I live here in the Triad. Jason, I'm going to pick on you, lives down in Raleigh. I have just as much right to go to Raleigh and conduct business as what Jason has to come up to the Triad once he's licensed, right? What Jason and I can't do is sit down and say, okay, I'm only going to work the Triad and you're only going to work the Triangle. You don't come to the Triad and I don't come to the Triangle. Does that make sense? That's us dividing the market. That's us limiting. I may choose just to work the Triad, but that's my choosing, not Jason and I getting together. We could all be in the Triad. One of us wants to do residential, one of us wants to do commercial. That's fine, but we can't divide the market. We have that ability, that opportunity to do residential and or commercial. Gee, Julie, what's the big deal? Well, now we're looking at penalties of $100,000 and possibly spending time in the big house with the little windows. This is the violation of Sherman's Antitrust Act. These are the penalties. Questions on this? As promised, in this unit, we start talking about your commission. So how do we earn our commission? First off, why don't you guys remind me? You can unmute or put it in the chat. You guys should still be set to everyone. So keep it everyone if it's not. Whose commission is it? Yep. Everybody seeing this come through? Is it the individual broker's commission? No, it is the firm's commission. The firm pays their agent. How much are they going to pay you? That depends on their firm's policy. That's the other thing and the other piece of the math that we're heading to at the end of this unit. You're going to get a split of your firm's commission. You might be on a 50-50 split. You might be on a 100% split. The question is, if I'm on 100%, what do I get? If I'm on a 50-50 split, what do I get? And that may be where you need to sit down. And again, we're going to talk about affiliating with a firm. How they pay you, what that split is different. And it varies from firm to firm to firm. Generally speaking, though, our commission could be a flat fee, which means the firm could say, we're going to charge $1,500, regardless of the purchase price. I think more commonly, typically what we see is a percentage of the sales price. What's that word of mean in a math problem? That word of means multiply. So our commission is a percentage. It's based off of the sales price. Typically, again, flat fees, another common. And I want to put this here because I always forget to talk about it when we get there. So I do want to mention a net listing. Let's see, question comes in. Could they do both a flat fee and a percentage? Could the firm do both? Sure. The firm could say, I'm going to charge you a flat fee of X amount and then a percentage. It's up to the firm's policy. Let's all understand right now, every single firm is different. There's not much, as long as they're not violating license law and commission rule, the firm is free to set themselves up and operate however they want. And that's nice because it gives us options. Again, imagine a world where the real estate commission said, firm, this is how you have to operate. We don't have choices, do we? So firms are all different, and as long as they're not violating. Yep, good question. So there's something out there called a net listing, and it's on pages 212 and 213. And like I said, I always forget to talk about it, so I just threw it in here. With a net listing, these are very rare. And when they are used, if they are used, they're not recommended. I know, for example, the Triad MLS won't allow a net listing. I'm not sure about other MLSs. But evidently they're still out there because we're talking about it. So a net listing, the agreement is the amount that the seller will receive when the property is sold. So the seller looks at you and says, I got to make X amount. And then in the net listing, I'm free to list the property for any amount over that, and I'll get the excess. My commission will be whatever is over the seller net. Can we see the conflict of interest? Because quite frankly, for my client, if I can sell their house for more, I can put more in their pocket. And remember, old car is what's about them. So the net listing like limits that. And it says, you only got to make 50,000. Well, I'll sell your house for 150. And then I just made $100,000 commission. And here's your 50, right? Do you see where the conflict of interest is there? So we receive anything over that amount that the seller has agreed. And that's why it's an obvious conflict of interest. These things are not illegal yet, but they are strongly discouraged. And like I said, I know my MLS, I can't speak for others, but I know my MLS doesn't allow it. So how do we earn our commission? Well, first off, you're getting there. You have to have a current license that's on active status. What does current mean? What does active mean? Hang on to that for now. We're going to talk about current and active and inactive and expired and all that when we get to license law and commission roll. Right now, all we need to understand is that if you want to get paid, you have to have a current license that's on active status. And I'm even going to talk to you guys about how you keep it current and how you keep it active. I feel like my job is twofold. Help you get your license, and then two, help you keep your license once you get them. Y'all worked hard for this, and I want to make sure that you get to keep it. So more on that. So an active current license, and then you either have to be affiliated with the firm that has the listing agreement. In other words, you're acting as the listing agent, or you're the one that brought that three-legged stool, that ready, willing, and able buyer. So our licenses are current and active. We are affiliated with the firm with the listing agreement, and or we're the ones that brought not just any buyer, but a ready, willing, and able buyer. All three pieces. There is a difference on when we earn our commission versus when we actually get paid. And we're going to talk about those differences when we look at our agency agreements. So here's kind of I'm going to go ahead and say, this is an unfair question, but this kind of starts a conversation for us. Can you get paid if your license is on inactive or expired status? What did we just say? Current and active is how you earn a commission. So the trick question on the board is, can you get paid if your license is inactive or expired? And why is it a trick? Because the answer is, it depends. If your license was active and you brokeraged the majority of the deal, the majority of the transaction, and you stop all brokerage activities as soon as your license goes inactive or expired, the commission will allow the firm to pay you. It depends is it's got to be up to the firm's policy. So I'm going to say all that again. Try to. You brokeraged the majority of the deal. You got the buyer and or seller, you connected them, you got them through most of the contract process. Pretty much the only thing left to do is to go to closing. That's what we mean. You brokeraged, you managed the majority of this transaction. Bless you. And your license goes inactive or expired. You got to stop immediately. you cannot practice on an inactive or expired license, which means your broker in charge may have to go to closing for you. You can't go to closing, somebody else in the firm will have to. The commission will allow the firm to pay you. It's up to the firm's policy whether or not they're going to pay you or not. Your exams are from the commission. They are not from the individual firms. So the answer to that is, it depends. Questions on that? What if? What if you have a listing and you get those sellers under contract and you're days away from closing and you change firms? You're leaving that behind, right? You can't take it with you because whose listing is it? It's the firm's, and you're days away from closing. And you go to another firm, you go join another firm. Can the old firm still pay you when it closes? The answer is, it depends. I may have mentioned this, I don't remember if I did or not, but when you guys are signing those independent contractor agreements, when you're signing on to affiliate with your firm, I need you to read those things and specifically find out what happens if you leave. And I know that's so funny to say because you're just getting ready to join and you're so exciting, and leaving is the furthest thing from your mind. But it happens. And I need you to know what may happen to any listings, buyers, commission, training fees. There's so many things that we just need to know what happens if you leave, and that should all be spelled out in your independent contractor. Questions? My coffee got cold. Yuck. Let's see. Can an agent negotiate their commission if they're a high producer? Absolutely. And firms may have different splits. So they may say newbies are going to be on the lower end, but those of you that are top producers and been top producing for 15 years, you're probably going to get a higher split. So they may have different options, different levels, if you will, just depending on your experience or your preference. Again, I know 100% sounds good, doesn't it? The problem, or the thing to consider, I shouldn't have said problem, but the thing to consider with 100%, there's a really good chance that they're not providing yard signs and combo boxes and marketing materials. You will have to pay for those on your own. If you go for a firm, for example, that's a 70-30 split, they may offer you some stuff. They may provide the yard sign. So that's 100% sounds great on the surface. But once we do a comparison, which is why when we get there, you guys are going to hear me tell you to talk to 2 or 3 different firms to find out, so you have something to compare and contrast, because they are all different. 100% can happen after you reach the firm's cap if provided one, correct? If that's the commission split that the firm offers, and some of them do that. You work on a lower percentage until you get to this cap. Once you get to this cap, you're on 100% for the rest of the year. At the first of the year, you reset to 0. So some of them absolutely have a tiered, not all, but some of them, yep, they're all different. Write that down. All firms are different, because they are. And I'll always encourage you guys. Every once in a while, one of you will call me and say, what firm should I join? I'm not going there. I'm telling you right now, I'm not going there, because what if it goes wrong? Who are you calling first? Well, Julie told me, yeah, so save yourself a phone call. I'm not going there. What I am going to tell you is that you need to talk to 2 or 3 different firms and decide which one is the best fit, the right fit for you. I'm not opening that can of worms. So just a little teaser on your commission. Again, we'll pick up calculators and actually calculate your commission with some examples when we get to the end of this unit. But for right now, let's take a break. We come back, we're going to talk about pre-listing, getting ready for your listing appointment, and eventually getting us into our listing agreement. So let's take 10. Welcome back. Cameras are on. I am taking attendance. So let's talk about working with sellers, and specifically, what are some things that we need to know to get ready for this listing appointment and possibly the listing. So before we look into this, let's understand a couple things going into this conversation. First, and most importantly, safety is always first, except in this class. The last thing we talk about is agent safety. So we're going to talk about always protecting yourself, always being aware of your surroundings, always knowing who you're dealing with, not just showing up and meeting total strangers at vacant properties, for example. So agent safety is always first. The other piece of safety is for the sellers. I'm getting ready to open their home to the world. Once I put that listing in, it goes on the internet, and everybody across the world is going to be able to see what the inside of their home looks like. Furthermore, we're going to allow showings. We're going to allow strangers to tramp through the home. We're going to allow open houses, possibly. So we need to have these conversations with the sellers to protect their stuff. When you're getting ready to list, when you know you have the listing, and you and your seller are working to get it on the market, we need to encourage our seller to depersonalize, take down some of their personal effects. And one is for their safety, but two, I want a buyer to envision themselves living here. And it's hard for somebody to imagine themselves living here when they're looking at pictures of your kids, right? I sell space, not stuff. So the more space we can see, the better. It helps me, but it also helps your seller, protect your seller, especially. We don't want pictures of the kids all over the internet, right? We don't want their valuable collection on display for the world to see, etc. So again, more on that. The very last thing we talk about, well, the next to last thing we talk about in this class is agent safety. The last thing we talk about is your rules and expectations for your exam. So we're a few months away from that. The other piece of this conversation, I know this says pre-listing. There's no right way to get a listing. It might be that somebody calls you, maybe they know you, and they say, hey, I want you, will you list my house? Awesome. Now we got to get our listing paperwork together and da-da-da-da-da. It might be that the seller is talking to you and a couple other agents. Competitive listing appointments are very much a real thing right now. So you might be going to the property first to sell yourself and your services. They talk to two other agents, decide they want to hire you. Now you go back to do the paperwork and get the property ready to market. So again, we just say there's a couple different avenues, but bottom line, getting a property ready to list, depending on how it goes, pretty much has the same feel. And that's what we're talking about here. No matter how you get the listing, how do we get ready for it? To get yourself ready, to prepare yourself for the listing, we need to learn as much about the property as we possibly can. What's the zoning? Is NCDOT planning a road project nearby? What's some information on the neighborhood? What's close by the neighborhood? What can I use in the neighborhood to market the property? Where's it located? Everything that's ever been listed in the MLS remains. I think the MLS came to be in like the mid-90s, and every listing that's ever been put in is still there. So you could do a history search on this listing. Now, you may not be able to know what it looks like today because you haven't been to the listing yet. You don't know what they did to it. But you can look at the past listings and see what the property used to look like. And we can use that, right? So if we see in pictures and previous listings that there was a wall there, and then you show up for the listing appointment and there's no wall, did your little red flag just go up? Are you asking questions? You tore a wall down? Did you have that permitted? Right? These are the kind of things we can learn. What I'm telling you guys is when you're getting ready for a listing, whether you know the person or not, I need you to learn as much about the home as you possibly can. Ideally, when you show up for that listing appointment, the only thing you don't know is what the inside looks like now. Does that make sense? We're learning all about the area, the surrounding, the past, the history. Is it in an HOA? We're learning as much as we possibly can. So let's talk about this competitive listing appointment. And let's say I have an appointment with a seller this afternoon. And again, I just look up and see Joel, so I'm going to pick on you. Joel has a listing with these same sellers tomorrow morning. Joel and I are competitive listings. I'm going to sell myself. He's coming to sell himself. Maybe we know we're in a competitive listing appointment. Maybe we don't. This is why I say I need you guys to bring your A game every single time. So let's say I'm not a great agent and I go to my listing appointment this afternoon. I say, do y'all know your zoning? And have y'all gotten any kind of letters from DOT about road widening project? And can you tell me this and tell me that? All this information that I could look up online. Are you in a flood zone? All this stuff I could look up. The sellers are thinking, I don't know anything about their home, right? Guess what? The sellers would be spot on accurate. Then Joel goes tomorrow. Joel knows the zoning. Joel knows that DOT is not doing anything. Joel knows this stuff because he did his research. He did his homework. And doesn't it come out? It's very apparent in the listing agreement. Who's going to get that listing? The one that knows or the one that has no clue? Who's a really good chance? Hint, it's not me. Because Joel went in there talking about what he knew and what he was talking about. He learned as much about the home as he possibly could. Thank you, Joel, for letting me pick on you. Also, to get it ready to list, we need to get some information. We need to get some documents. This is all listed for you in your book, page 190 and 191. We can ask the seller, we want to ask the seller if they still have a copy of their deed. I'm still going to pull it up online. I'm going to go do a public record search and pull up the current deed. But isn't it worth making sure the deed that I find and the deed that the sellers have is the same thing, that it matches? Because if I got a discrepancy, we need to figure this out. Because remember, North Carolina is a spousal state. Is it a good chance they got married since we saw that deed? Is there a good chance we got divorced? What happened? You know, so we want to make sure our deeds match if the sellers have a copy. Sellers copy their survey if they had a survey done when they bought. Probably not want to make it available to the buyers. Maybe they do, but we still want to encourage our buyers to have their own survey done because sometimes trees fall down and rocks roll away, right? So we want to know the appropriate property lines. The reason I'm asking the seller for a copy of their survey is so I can market the property. It's going to give me lot dimensions. It's going to give me, of course, location, where the easements on the property. So the survey can help me, if they have it, can help me market it. If it's in an HOA, we want the covenants, bylaws, articles of incorporation, whatever they have. I'm telling you right now, a good buyer's agent is going to call and ask for it. So let's go ahead and get it ready. So when they call, we have it. Does that make sense? I like to make my listings easy to sell. I don't want the buyers out there searching information when I can provide it to them. My personal opinion, you take that for what you want. But if we can get copies of these things that we know that we're going to get asked on, such as the covenants. And then another thing we need to get from our sellers is their outstanding debt, their outstanding mortgages. When we look at our listing agreement, we're going to see that it says approximate balance. Now, I'm not trying to get down to the penny just yet, but I need an idea before I list. Why? Well, seller says I owe X amount on a first mortgage, and I owe X amount on a second mortgage, and I owe X amount on a third mortgage, and I have an outstanding lien, and I have a judgment. That starts adding up, right? At some point, my little red flag's going up and asking myself, can they afford to sell? This helps me determine if the seller's underwater. And what it means for a seller to be underwater is that they owe more than what I can sell their house for. And if that's the case, the seller is going to have to bring money to closing. Would you rather know that the seller can't afford to bring money to closing before you list it or the day before closing? It's a hard conversation to have. For the most part, I just met this seller and I'm already launching into some pretty personal information, right? Like, what's your debt? How much do you owe? But it's going to save us and them some time and some heartache. Could you imagine the day before closing calling your seller and say, you owe X amount? And the seller saying, I don't have that kind of money. They can't convey clear marketable title. Guess what, folks? Game over. So we have to have these hard conversations up front, asking them for the copies of their mortgage or at least statements from their mortgage. Again, we'll get down to the nitty gritty, to the penny, as we get closer to closing. This is just giving me an idea if we're close, if I'm dealing with a seller that's underwater. We're going to talk about foreclosures and short sales when we get to our financing unit. Both of those are results of the seller owing more than what it's worth. There's also some documents, some things that the broker can put together. We want to go through the property with our listing data sheet. Listing data sheet generally comes from MLS. I'll show you in just a second. I got one in the online learning system for you. And it allows me to go through the home and kind of check off the boxes, the features of the home, so I can make sure that I'm not only properly advertising it, but I'm fully advertising it. If there's a special feature of the home, something that stands out, I want to make sure that I have that. That's something different than the others. So we'll see that, briefly look at that listing data sheet in just a second. We want to identify personal property and fixtures. Remember, we talked about these back in Unit 2. Fixtures are meant to stay. Personal property is meant to go. I need to know now if the seller is going to do anything the opposite of their intent. If the seller is going to take a fixture, we need to identify it. If the seller is willing to leave personal property, we need to identify it, decide how that's going to be addressed. I can suggest needed repairs, improvements, staging, paint your front door color to make it pop. I can make you suggestions all day long. Do they have to do anything that I suggest? No, but can't I make the suggestions? Can I say, if you spend a couple $100 and get a landscaper out here, we'd have a much better curb appeal. We'd be more apt to have an attractive buyer. It's just a suggestion. Maybe I can get you full dollar if you just paint the front door. I don't know. Cleaning up, doing any repairs, anything at all that we can suggest to make the listing better and go faster, and bottom line, get top dollar for your sellers. Make sure the listing data is accurate and complete. That takes us back to our listing data sheet. I said it and I'll say it again and again and again. My little brain, y'all, and there's a lot of information out there. And if you're at the listing appointment and you're not keeping track of what's in this home, you get home, you're putting an MLS and you're going to be going, gosh, did this home have that? So do that listing data sheet so you can properly market and advertise the property. This is awful to say, but after you've seen enough properties, they all start running together. And you start kind of piecemealing them. And you're sitting there going, now, did the house have the really fancy ceiling fan? Or was that another house? Gee, I can't remember. They start running together after a while. Once you've seen enough of them, they start running together. So having that data sheet so you can properly advertise. Have you guys ever ridden around with one of us? Been in a car with one of us? We're so annoying. I think I showed a house in this neighborhood once. I might have done an open house over here once. I closed that house one time. We're going to tell you everywhere you take us. We're going to tell you where we've been and what we touched. It all runs together. Is that awful to say? That's the truth, y'all. So have that data sheet so you can get the accurate information. And then we got to ask about construction, repair permits, alterations, anything that might require a permit. So we're still getting ready. The seller and I can gather information. I can go online and search several places. Again, your firm will have a checklist of things that they want you to check out before you list it. Zoning, DOT, is it in a flood zone, that kind of thing. When we look at our listing agreement as well, our listing agreement is an employment contract, but I also consider it a really good checklist because it gives me a list of things that I need to address, I need to talk about with the seller. So it kind of built-in checklist with it. So again, the pre-listing activities, again, maybe that first meeting is that competitive listing appointment. Maybe that first meeting is because you have the listing. But either way, we've gathered the information. Now we're going to the seller's home for the first time. May it be to list it or to compete for it. Early on in the transaction, if first substantial contact has not happened yet, then we need to do our working with real estate agent disclosure as soon as we get to the house. Remember, this is me letting the consumer know, I don't owe you confidentiality until and if you decide to hire me. So before I view your home, before I talk to you about material facts, before I learn anything about you, you need to understand where I come into this transaction. Back to that competitive listing appointment. If I don't tell them that, if I don't give them that warning, and they tell me all sorts of stuff, because they trust me, they think I look like a nice person, so they trust me. But at the end of the day, they give the listing to Joel. And I bring the buyer to the transaction. Don't I have a duty to tell my buyer client everything I learned? I let them talk and on and on and on. They never hired me. They need that warning. I don't owe you confidentiality until and if you decide to hire me. Again, the reason for the asterisk, we can do the working with real estate agent disclosure at the first meeting as long as we haven't already hit first substantial contact. If we hit first substantial on the phone when we're preparing for this meeting or we're scheduling this meeting, then we have to do our working with real estate agent disclosure at that time. But the latest we have to do it is at that. Before we talk about anything, let's sit down and have that conversation. So now the first meeting, Joel got the listing. So now he's ready to get this thing into the system. Maybe it's the first, like I said, maybe it's the first meeting. Maybe you do the competitive thing and then you come back when you get the listing. There's no right way to do that. So we're going to inspect the property. Ideally, we're going to walk through the property with the seller, have them point out not just the bad features, there's good features of this home too. One thing I always ask the seller is, what made you buy this house? What was it about this house? Couldn't that be a good thing for other buyers? If there was a room in the back of the house that gets lots of morning sun, maybe that's what did it, right? So we can let the sellers help us sell it. What are things about the home that you love? Let's go through and talk about the good and the bad. Let's inspect the property. Remember, you guys, I can't walk into a room and be like, oh, everything looks good here. I don't see any problems. We always have to go around looking, paying attention to those little red flags. And when you see a little red flag, if something doesn't look normal to you, then we got to ask some questions. That's that duty to discover and disclose. Discover piece means little red flag, prompting us to ask questions. There's that data sheet. We're going to ask about any recent renovations, repairs, or construction. Sometimes if a room was built onto the back of the house, you can tell. The exterior doesn't match exactly, right? It just looks a little, it's not much off, but it's a hair off. Did your little red flag just go up? Hey, looks like you finished the room in the back of the house. Did y'all have permits done? So just asking the questions. Finding out if it's on public sewer or on-site septic. Remember, if it's on an on-site septic, we can only advertise the number of bedrooms that's allowed on the septic permit. If it's an on-site septic and the seller doesn't have a septic permit, let's get on the phone with the county health department. They can help us. Maybe they have one on file. Maybe they need to come out and inspect it, but we got to get our hands on that permit. Sometimes sellers don't know. Sometimes sellers don't know if they're on public or on-site septic. So the easiest way I know to find out is go get your power or your water bill. If you're charged for sewer, you're on public. If you're not, you got a septic system somewhere in your yard. Does that make sense? So let's just look at your most recent water bill, see what you're being charged for. We're going to discuss our marketing plan. How am I going to market and advertise your home? Am I going to do an open house? And if so, how often? What promotions are going to use? Do not look at sellers and say, I'll put your home in MLS. You know what every single broker across the country does? Puts it in MLS. I'm not saying don't say that. What I'm saying is, what else are you going to do? Again, you may be trying to compete. So what's your marketing versus the other agent's marketing? And then we have to help the seller determine square footage. I'm not going to say anything else about that now because I got a whole section for square foot later in Unit 8. So we're going to talk about what counts as total heated living area and how the different ways that we can determine that. But right now, just know we got to put an accurate square footage into the property. So more on that in just a second. Earning a fee as a buyer's agent. You've been hired as a buyer's agent. So again, you got that current and active license. You're only owed a commission when you have a written buyer agency agreement. So we have to eventually put that thing in writing. And then you're producing that three-legged stool, that ready, willing, and able buyer. Maybe you are being paid from the listing firm. Seller pays the listing firm shares their commission with whomever brings a buyer. Maybe the listing firm isn't offering you anything, in which case the buyer will pay your commission. And that is addressed in our written buyer agency agreement. As a buyer's agent, there's a couple different fees we could earn. Talking about the success fee first, that's when you've successfully completed the transaction. So once you connect that buyer, that ready, willing, and able buyer to the seller, the property closes, you're paid a success fee. Your firm may allow you to charge a retainer fee. With a retainer fee, you're going to collect a portion of your commission up front. If the buyer buys, that'll be credited towards the total commission due. If they don't buy, at least you've been paid a little something for your time, gas, mileage, etc. You guys ever hear attorneys specifically on TV talking about, you got to pay me a retainer fee? You got to pay me something to make that relationship official? Something similar here. Here's the caveat with the retainer fee. In order to collect a retainer fee, we must have a written agency agreement. I cannot collect any money on an oral agency agreement. So again, if your firm allows it, no, not earnest money. That's just you paying me a portion of my commission. Yep, we'll talk about earnest money in contract world. So the retainer fee, the firm has to allow it, and it's a written agency agreement. So what are these fees? How are they getting split? Well, typically, right now, a co-brokered sale. It is advertised in MLS. When you bring me this ready, willing, and able buyer, This is how much I'm willing to pay you. Is it a flat fee or is it a percentage? If anything at all. Again, that's one thing I'll say that's happened from this settlement. It used to be you had to put in an amount. But one change we've already seen is we have the option to put in 0. So if you're looking at this listing and they're offering you 0 commission, I'm not saying you're not going to get paid. I'm saying you have a buyer's agency agreement that says they will pay you. So advertise whatever that commission is, if any, in the MLS. And that's what the listing firm agrees to pay whomever brings the buyer. May that be a buyer's agent and or seller subagent. An in-house transaction. This is our dual agency. One firm is helping both buyer and seller. How do you get paid on an in-house situation? Well, it's up to your firm's policy. You'll get paid X amount as a listing agent, X amount as a selling agent, and that's all needs to be spelled out in that independent contractor agreement you guys are all going to read, so you know what you're committing to. You may also have a co-listing situation where 2 firms share a listing. A couple examples of where we might see a co-listing. Let's say there's a property in Salisbury. Salisbury is kind of that no man's land, right? Is it the Triad? Is it Charlotte? Where does Salisbury belong? So it might be that that seller in Salisbury, for example, wants to hire an agent from the Triad MLS and hire an agent from the Charlotte MLS. And that would get them that double exposure. I think another good example of when we might co-list are maybe some multi-million-dollar properties, multi-million-dollar homes. It's about exposure. You know, once upon a time ago, before we had buyer's agents commission, co-listings were a lot more, or buyer's agency, co-listings were a lot more popular because you created more exposure. Remember, it was like buying a car at a used car lot. So now it's like buying a house on a house lot. Today with the internet, today with buyer's agency, you know, exposure, once you put it in MLS, it goes to everywhere in the world. But it still might come down to local marketing, for example. Whether or not you can engage in a co-listing is determined by your firm. Maybe they want to get involved with sharing, maybe they don't. I don't know, y'all. If it's a 10 million property, $10 million property, I'm probably okay with sharing my listing, my commission. If it's $100,000 property, yeah, no. You guys with me? So that's why I say that higher end. But again, it's up to the firm whether or not we can co-list, and when, if we do, how we're all going to get paid. Our commission is covered under a law and a rule. Again, I just have this for reference. The law is 93A-6. This is actually 93A-6 is disciplinary action. What you can get in trouble for, that's a license law. Specifically, A5 says that provisional brokers, soon to be you guys, can only be paid by your affiliated firm, your affiliated BIC. So you can't accept payment directly from another agent for helping them out. You can't receive payment directly from a principal or from a third party. 93A-6A5 says you can only, as a PB, you can only be paid by your affiliated broker in charge. Commission Rule 58A.0120B says a full broker cannot receive commission from anyone other than their affiliated BIC. So what you need to know about this slide, we can only be paid by our affiliated firm, our affiliated broker. You might come across a builder for example, that's offering a $500 bonus to all buyers agents with an acceptable offer by the end of the week. That $500 bonus is not yours. It is the firm's. Are you going to get that whole $500, or will that be part of your compensation split? It's up to the firm and their policy. But either way, the builder can't hand you a check for $500. They got to run it through the firm. And that's what both license law and commission rule is addressing. Questions on how we can get paid, splitting those fees? If you didn't hear anything else, what I hope you heard me say was it's all up to the firm's policy. Any verbiage or implication otherwise is a violation of price fixing. And I'm telling you right now, with that settlement going on, price fixing is a hot button topic right now. So let's talk about our different types of listing agreements. We have more than one listing agreement that we may use. So we have several different types. By the way, these are referred to as full service listing agreements. We are going to talk about limited service listing agreements as well. But right now, under full service means I'll do it all. I'll list your property. I'll put it in MLS. I'll do an open house. I'll, signs, negotiate on your behalf. I'm giving you that full service. And a couple different options for a full service listing agreement. First up is the open listing. Open listing agreement is non-exclusive, which means the seller can hire as many firms as they want. But guess what? Only the one that sells the property is the one that's going to get paid. And the seller retains the right to sell it on their own and not pay anybody. So if the seller goes to work and they're in the break room and they're chit-chatting with a coworker and tell their coworker about their listing, and the coworker says, "Ooh, I want to buy it," all of us are out. So multiple firms, the only one that gets paid is the selling agent. Maybe that's the one listed it, maybe it's not. And the seller retains the right to sell it on their own. Now, simmer down before y'all get to, I see you, I hear you. Simmer down, give me a second. We don't like these much, do they? Do these sit well? Good news. These are not allowed in many of our MLSs. I know Triad doesn't allow them. I know Charlotte doesn't allow them. I cannot speak for the others. Once upon a time ago, again, imagine, if you will, life before the internet. And once upon a time ago, sellers' thinking was, the more firms I have, the more exposure I have, the better chance I have to sell my property. Even before we got buyer's agency, where we were walking around from house lots, open listings were a lot more popular then. Today, many MLSs don't allow them. I have to feel that one out there does allow it because we're still talking about it. I just don't know who those MLSs are. These are generally considered strongly discouraged. It's not protecting us whatsoever, is it? It offers us nothing. It just looks like a bunch of work to me without guarantee of compensation. So y'all feel a little bit better? Open listings, strongly discouraged. Good chance your MLS. If you do join an MLS that allows it, call me. I need to know where that one is or two. Let me know. Another type of listing agreement we have is called an exclusive agency listing. So exclusive means how many firms. Don't look. Exclusive means how many firms. All right, we're doing better now. We got exclusivity back. Remember that word, exclusivity. The seller is only dating one firm. So we got that exclusivity back. But with our exclusive agency listing, the listing firm will only get paid if they're the ones that bring that ready, willing, and able buyer. And the seller still retains the right to sell it without you, back to the coworker in the break room. What if you have this property listed and you have a sign, a for sale sign in the front yard, and the seller's outside Saturday morning mowing, and somebody drives by and stops and says, I'm interested in your property? Who got this buyer? Was it your sign, or was it the seller that was out front, stopped to talk to them? Bit of a conundrum, huh? The parties may have to get together and agree how we're gonna, there's no answer to that. Well, unless we see the case. But the point is that the seller retains the right. Still not great. I'm getting a little bit better. At least we're down to one firm, but that firm will only get paid when they bring that three-legged stool. These are allowed, but in all my years, I've never seen one out in the wild. So are they out there? Yes. It might be you affiliate with a firm that says we're going to use the exclusive agency listing, and you need to understand you better sell that house if you want to get paid. The third and final listing agreement is the one we like. And it's the one that's called exclusive right to sell. Exclusive meaning how many firms? One firm. And guess what? I have that exclusive right to sell. So I get paid no matter where the buyer comes from. Did I bring the buyer? Did somebody else in a different firm bring the buyer? Did the seller bring the buyer? I get paid, I get paid, I get paid. And this is the one that we see on the regular. Make a note between exclusive agency and exclusive right to sell. Exclusive agency says we're just dealing with one firm. Exclusive right to sell says I'm the one firm and I'm the only one that has the right to sell this property. So what we've done, if you look in the, don't write this down. If you look in the online learning system, we have this chart in there. And I think this is helpful, you know, a month or so from now, when you're preparing for your end of class exam, or when you're getting ready for your state exam. I think this is a good review. The money signs indicate when you can get paid. And as you can see, that exclusive right to sell. I get paid, I get paid, I get paid, and the seller can't sell it on their own. So just make a note that it's in the online learning system. Questions on our full service listing agreements? The exclusive agency is just that. We're only dealing with one firm. The owner still retains the right to bring the buyer. And if the owner brings the buyer, if the seller brings the buyer, I'm out. I'm not getting paid. The exclusive right to sell means I'm the only one exclusively that can sell this property, and I get paid. It does not matter where the buyer comes from. I get paid. I got exclusivity in both of them, but the difference is, what is it I'm exclusive about? Is it agency or is it that right to sell? And the exclusive right to sell is what we like. I got some questions for you guys. So set your chats back to private. So a realtor that wants their own property will want exclusive. It's not up to the broker. it's up to the firm which form we use. So selling your own property, if your firm says we're using the exclusive agency, then that's what we use. Because you imagine not getting paid on that. But if that's what your firm uses. Again, you guys, I've never seen an exclusive agency out in the wild, ever. Coming up on 23 years. They're out there, obviously we're talking about them, but they're not that common. What we deal with, and I can almost guarantee you, once you get your license, you may never see open listing or exclusive agent listing again. This is just one of these things we got to get you through your exam. Everybody's chat set to private? So tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. Just a few more seconds to weigh in. I need to hear something from everybody, please. If you don't know, say IDK. You always got a 25% chance of getting it right. So let's talk about Devin. Devin begins marketing her new listing, which her office has the sole right to market. If you got the sole right, how many firms you got? Just one, which tells us this is something exclusive. Sole right to market, the only one that can market it. The seller decides to sell the property directly to their cousin without going through Devin and avoid the obligation to pay a commission. The type of listing agreement that Devin and the seller have, they have that exclusive agency agreement. Why is it exclusive? Sole meaning only one firm has the right. So we know we got exclusivity. But Devin's not going to get paid because the seller sold the property directly to their cousin. Devin's only going to get paid when she sells the property. And she didn't. So we're dealing with an exclusive agency agreement. Questions on this one? Okay. That was fun. Let's do another one. Private chat, A, B, C, or D. Tell me about Thomas. Everybody in? We all agree not to be like Thomas. We may not know much, but let's not be like Thomas. Okay. Let's be better than Thomas. But let's just say Thomas lists a property and begins marketing. The seller sells the property directly to a coworker after talking to them about it in the break room. Despite Thomas's limited involvement, what did Thomas do? Limited involvement says Thomas didn't do much, did he? Don't be the Thomases. Despite Thomas's limited involvement, his firm is still owed a commission. What type of agreement is Thomas working under? I get paid, I get paid, I get paid. No matter what I do or don't do, no matter where the buyer comes from, Thomas will, or Thomas's firm will get paid. Questions? Sometimes these houses sell themselves. If you were familiar with the market a couple years ago and this crazy seller's market, I mean, literally all you had to do was put a for sale sign in the front yard and boom, the thing was under contract. That's the kind of market we're coming out of. We're back to working again. We got to market, we got to advertise. We're doing open houses again. We're on the market for more than half a day. In North Carolina, we also have something called the North Carolina Protection Agreement. This is protecting you and your commission. I'm not creating agency. That's not what this is about. But let's say you're working with a buyer and the buyer becomes interested in a for sale by owner. So you contact the FSBO, you call the FSBO and you say, initial contact, my name is Julie Campbell and I have a buyer that's interested in your listing. Can we come out and see it this afternoon at 2:00? And the FSBO says, yeah, sounds great. We'll see you then. And then as a buyer's agent, per your buyer's agent agreement, you say, are you willing to cooperate with me? Are you willing to pay me if my buyer buys your house? Is the FSBO under any obligation to pay you? Nah, they're going it alone. They don't have to pay you. So they got two choices. They can either say, yes, I'll pay you, or no, I won't. If they say, oh yeah, I'll pay you. Yeah, no worries. You can trust me. Are you going to take them at their word? Everybody shake your head no. This is your commission you're talking about. You're going to let a total stranger over the phone say that they're going to pay you? No. So how do we protect our commission? We have this protection agreement if the FSBO is willing to pay you. On page 207, the in practice gives us the name of the form. The name of the protection agreement form is the unrepresented seller disclosure and fee agreement. I'm not trying to create agency. All I'm doing is, as somebody just said in the chat, absolutely. I'm putting this in writing. I am documenting what? Everything. And that includes your agreement to pay my commission for sale by owner. If the FSBO says, no, I'm not going to pay you, then who's the other party to the transaction? Your buyer. And that's exactly what our buyer's agency agreement says and has always said. I will always ask the seller to pay me first. But if they can't or won't, you're up. I owe it to my buyer to ask. That's what our agency agreement says. I will ask. The FSBO has every right to say no. Despite how the FSBO responds, maybe they're going to pay you, maybe they're not. Despite how they respond, what do I always need to do with the for sale by owner? What do I always need to do with them, regardless if they're going to pay me or not? Early in the conversation.
Is it REIA?
It's our working with real estate agent disclosure. Absolutely, Regina. Yep. I think that's what you meant, right? You and I, we're like right there. Okay. So yes, it is our working with real estate agent disclosure. Doesn't that FSBO have the right to know that you represent the buyer? And anything you tell me, you might as well be talking to the buyer directly because I owe them confidentiality. I don't owe you that. Doesn't the FSBO have the right to know that? Whether they're going to pay you or not, we always need to do our working with real estate agent disclosure. Let them know they're not the ones getting confidentiality. It's your buyer client. They chose to go unrepresented. I'm going to honor their decision. The only reason I'm talking to them is because my buyer's interested in their property. And they have that right to know that my buyer is the client. Questions? Protection agreement protects our commission. It's nice, isn't it? There's stuff out there for us too. Okay. Let's take a break. We come back. We might even get to our listing agreement today. So let's take 10, see what we got. So let me take attendance. Oops. So we talked about those full service listing agreements with our different types of listing agreements, the open listing, exclusive agency, and exclusive right to sell. We're starting to see gaining in popularity of a limited service firm. Understand this. A limited service firm limits the services, not the duties. A limited service firm owes their seller OCART. We're not limiting the duties, we're just limiting the services. So what am I going to do? A lot of times with limited service firms, we have a la carte pricing. You want me to put this in MLS for you? I'm going to charge X amount. You want me to do an open house? I'm going to charge X amount. You want to use my combo box? I'm going to charge you X amount. Limited service firms are available to all sellers. Where I think they have the popularity is with investors and flippers. People that do this on the regular, they don't need to pay a full service firm. They may choose not to pay. In some cases, they just might need it in MLS. I've done a couple of these as a buyer's agent. And I know the one in particular, I sent my buyer open housing because there's a couple properties that she wanted to see, and I was doing an open house that Sunday. So I gave her a stack of business cards and said, go check them out. Let me know what you think. She called me after the open house and said, I want to write up an offer on one of them. I was like, that was easy. It was a limited service listing, which means she said, I think I met the seller at the open house. And I said, you know what? There's a really good chance that you did. The instructions in the MLS told me to present the offer directly to the seller. All the communication I had in that transaction was with the seller. To this day, I've not had any kind of transaction with the listing agent. They were just there. They still had OCAR. So if we want to negotiate, if the seller called them and said, we just got an offer, is this a good one? What do you think? You know, that kind of thing. They're still offering the duties. They're just limiting the services. Oh my goodness. So there's good and bad, right? You get good experiences and bad experiences. I had a very good experience, and I'm not going to lie. When I looked at the MLS and it said contact the seller, I thought, oh Lord, does this person know what he's talking about? But it didn't take me long to, I mean, he sold like 12 of these things a year. So he knew what he was talking about. I was very fortunate. Again, pluses and minuses to everything. The important thing is that we have to promote this in MLS. We have to disclose if we're a full service or a limited service company. The agency agreements that we have that we went over aren't going to apply to this situation because those agency agreements say, I'm going to do this, this, and this. So these limited service firms will probably have their own listing agreement drafted up that allows, like I said, the a la carte pricing. What do you want and how much? By the way, that limited service deal I did, when we went to closing and I could see both sides' commissions, I got paid the amount that my firm expects to collect when we help a buyer buy. The listing firm got like $450. So pretty much all they were paid to do was put it in MLS. That's what we mean by limited service. We have danced all around it, and now we are finally here at our multiple listing services. As an example, one multiple listing service is the Triad MLS. The Triad MLS is the Winston-Salem Board of Realtors, the High Point Board of Realtors, the Greensboro Board of Realtors. There's a Lexington Board of Realtors, Asheboro, I think. We have multiple boards of realtors that all come together for the Triad MLS. Same thing with Charlotte. You got Charlotte called Canopy, and you got surrounding markets out in the Triangle. covers Raleigh, Durham, Cary, and those surrounding markets. I don't know how many MLSs are in the state, but some way or another, we're all covered no matter where you are when you join. So the whole point, there's two main reasons for the MLS. We agree to pool our listings. This is what creates that inventory. This is what gives me a product to sell. It puts something on the shelves. I may not have a listing right now, but 2,900 other agents do, and they open it up to allow me to sell their listing through the MLS. The second piece of it is that it offers compensation. So again, there's information members of MLS see that non-members don't. So once this is disseminated to, Zillow and Realtor.com and all that good stuff, you don't see everything that members do. And one thing in particular, you're not going to see on a second or a third party site is what I'm going to be paid if I bring you that ready, willing, and able buyer. So we have that offer, compensation, and cooperation. This is what also allows us to say, we'll work with buyer's agents only, or we'll work with buyer's agents and seller sub-agents. That all comes down in that offer of compensation. So where we are now, we're going to look at our listing agreement, specifically our exclusive right to sell listing agreement. All of our pre-printed forms come with a number. You don't need to know the number. I just put it there for reference. I think in practice, if you know the numbers of the forms that you are going to use, they're easier to find. I'm going to tell you right now, there are hundreds of standard forms for us to use. And sometimes finding them is the challenge. I don't know. I'd have to see that ad, Alini, to see what that's, but it's not, it says under commission. So I'm not sure. I'd have to see that ad to see what that's saying. But generally speaking, couldn't you always find an exception? Of course, but generally speaking, we offer our compensation through MLS. It might be a for sale by owner. It might be a for sale by owner saying, I'll pay you. They don't have that option to go into MLS. So they have to put their listing in several different places. So a couple things. I want you guys to make a note in your book, starting on page 211. The whole way over to 216, 211 to 216. These are provisions, common provisions in your listing agreement. So I think looking at 211 to 216 will kind of help you see further explanation of the provisions that we're getting ready to go over. So we're going to look at this this listing agreement together. Before I do that, under the Julie folder, remember we just mentioned license law 93A-6. I have this in here for you guys as well. So I have license law 93A, A-6. And then I have commission rule 58A.0104. I think you guys need to read these. This is why I have them here in the Julie folder. I'm asking you to read one rule and one law. And this law, the common question I get is, what can I do? What will face me? What will I face disciplinary action for? And it's all spelled out in license law 93A-6. So we've touched on it. I think you guys should read it. Again, they're both under the Julie folder, 93A-6 and 58A.0104. Going back up. We look at the Unit 8 material. I have our exclusive right to sell listing agreement, standard form 101 with highlights. If it's highlighted, it's because it's in the syllabus. If it's in the syllabus, it's a good candidate for your exam. So instead of asking you guys to read this whole thing, I've gone through and highlighted the provision. I think you guys should read what's highlighted. I think you should look at the whole thing, but I think you should read what's highlighted because it's a candidate for your exam. So between looking at the form, again, under the Unit 8 material, And then in your book, starting on page 211, it gives you a further breakdown of what you and I are going to go through together. Also keep in mind for time purposes and to keep us on track. If it's not highlighted, I'm not saying much about it. If it's not highlighted and you want to know more about it, then just reach out to me after class. So if we look at our listing agreement, we have our exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Just as a side note, some of our more commonly used forms come with guidelines. So another one of my super simple philosophies: when in doubt, find out. If you don't know how to properly complete this form, you have a duty. Remember that reasonable skill, care, and diligence thing we talked about? You have a duty to find out. Don't put something in a blank for the sake of putting something in the blank, in the blank. So we have guidelines to complete. That's what that's guiding us to. Then we have our exclusive right to sell listing agreement is entered into between the seller and whom? The firm. Everybody see that? The listing firm and the seller is who this exclusive right to sell listing agreement is between. The first provision here, we have our term of our agreement. This agreement is going to begin on the effective date. The effective date is the date that both parties sign this agreement. And it's going to end at 11:59 p.m. on its expiration date. We've got a couple different options of when the effective date may be. I'll let you guys look at that. But what I want us to see, remember our 4 musts? And one of our musts is that we have a definite end date. So it spells out for us, this agreement shall terminate not just at any time on this date, but at 11:59 p.m. At the stroke of midnight, I'm no longer your agent unless we agree to extend. So we have our effective date and we have how long the agreement's good for. Again, you cannot have an open listing agreement. We have to have a definite end date. Then we're going to describe the property. So what's the street address, city, zip, county? This is a North Carolina form used only for North Carolina properties. So we don't even have to put the state in. They do that for us. Just to point out a couple things at the bottom of the first page of any of our forms. First off, if you're a member of the National Association of Realtors, you can use the forms that rock the Realtor logo. If you're not a member, then you can't use these forms. If your firm isn't a member, then you can't use these forms. Your firm will have to have other forms drafted up by an attorney. The North Carolina Association of Realtors is who provides our standard forms. The Real Estate Commission does not give us our forms. This is important. Our forms come from the North Carolina Association of Realtors. So we've talked about the National Association of Realtors. Then we have a state level, which is the North Carolina, and they are the ones to give you. I'm in the Unit 8 material of the online learning system. Unit 8. And then we have our equal housing opportunity logo, letting the consumer know that we honor, and we're going to see verbiage as well. And then standard form with the current revised date. Does it always end at the sale of the property or the end date? Whichever one comes first. If I sell your property and our listing agreement hasn't expired yet, once I've done the job you hire me to do, We're done, even if we still have time together. So whichever one comes first. And then we have the legal description. This is the research that we're doing. What's the lot and block number? What's the deed, book and page? What's the tax ID? What other legal description we have? Again, those checklists you're going to get from your firm to help you know where to look for this stuff. We're instructed to complete all applicable. And then we have our fixtures. Specifically with our fixtures, we have a fixture list. We've already seen this list. We saw this back in Unit 2. But this is an opportunity. It's also in our listing agreement. It's in our sales contract as well. But this is the opportunity at the listing appointment to hand this to the seller and say, are you taking any of these fixtures with you? Because if you are, we need to discuss now. When are you going to take it down? Are you going to take it down before I list and replace it with something else that the buyer will never see? Or are you not going to take it down until we're under contract, until you move out, in which case we need to let the buyers know that it's excluded. Most sellers will look at you and say, okay, I'll look at this evening after dinner. I don't trust that. We need to talk about, you know what? I'm a pretty patient person. I can sit here quietly for 4.5 minutes while you look over this list. Everybody with me? Because if they're going to take anything from this list, we need to talk about it right now and make sure we're all on the same page. So our fixture list, again, exact same list shows up in our sales contract. And then we also need to address any personal property that the seller may be willing to leave. Examples of personal property. Number one personal property item, negotiable item, all day, every day, is the refrigerator. Closely behind the refrigerator is the washer and dryer. Anything else that the seller may be willing to leave. Understand this, and let your seller understand as well. Just because you're willing to leave the fridge doesn't mean that a buyer wants your fridge. If the buyer wants your fridge, they have to make that a thing in the sales contract. And if they don't want it, it's still personal property, and you have a duty to remove it before closing. So let the seller know. You can leave whatever you want to, but that doesn't mean that's what the buyer wants. Everybody with me? And if they don't want it, I had a listing, and my seller said, I don't need the fridge. Can I leave the fridge? And I said, well, if the buyer wants it. Offer came in. There was no mention of the refrigerator. I even called the buyer's agent and said, hey, my seller's willing to leave the fridge. And she said, nope, my buyer has their own fridge. They don't need his. I said, awesome. Thank you so much. Called my seller and said, you've got to get this out of the property before closing because it's personal property. Fixtures are meant to stay. Personal property is meant to go unless agreed otherwise in the sales contract. So again, having these conversations, and like I said earlier, use the listing agreement itself as a checklist to make sure we're talking about all these provisions with the seller. Then we have to talk about the listing price. What do we plan to list the property for, and under what terms? Some sellers don't want to deal with lenders. They don't want to deal with banks. So some sellers may say, we want cash buyers only. Other properties may not qualify for FHA or VA loan. So we can't just check all these boxes for the sake of checking them. We need to have this conversation. By the way, FHA and VA and USDA and conventional, all that's coming in our financing units. So we'll talk about those different loan types and why FHA and VA may not consider all properties. General rule of thumb, whenever we're asking a consumer, client or customer to sign anything, we need to have all the blanks filled in. We don't want to leave a blank and then ask them to fill it in. Does that make sense? Specifically, the commission says we can't ask the seller to sign this until we've agreed on the list price. What am I going to list your home for? We can't put TBD in there. We have to have the amount that we're going to list the property for. How are we going to arrive at that amount? Well, there's more research for us to do. We're going to pull some comps. We're going to look at some comparables, what other people are willing to buy, pay for similar properties nearby. That conversation is coming in Unit 17. So we'll talk about how we can arrive at a good listing price. Then we have our compensation. So the firm's compensation, seller agrees to pay the firm a total fee of either percentage of the sales price or a flat fee, which shall include the amount of any compensation paid by the firm as set forth in paragraph 8 below. I'm going to go ahead and skip to paragraph 8 for now. We'll come back and pick up the rest of it. But what's going on in the listing agreement? The seller agrees to pay a total of X amount. Remember, the seller pays the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with whomever brings the buyer. So step 1 is to determine how much the listing firm, the total fee. And then if we skip ahead for just a second, we're going to see in number 8 how we're going to cooperate if we're going to cooperate with whomever brings the buyer. Are we going to cooperate with subagents? If not, we have a big 0 here. Are we going to cooperate with buyer's agents? So there's how much do you expect to collect? And of that money, how much, if any, are you sharing with whomever brings the buyer? So how are we going to cooperate? The sellers have a right to know that. Questions on that? All right, so let's go back up and grab the rest of this. Still talking about the firm's compensation. As mentioned, there's a difference in when we earn our fee versus when we get paid. And the listing agreement spells that out for us. So when do we earn our fee? If a ready, willing, and able buyer is procured by the firm, the seller, or anyone else during the term of this agreement at the price and on the terms set forth within, or at any price and upon any terms acceptable to the seller. I will also, I have earned my fee when the property is sold, optioned, exchanged, conveyed, or transferred during the term of this agreement or any renewal at any price and upon any terms whatsoever. So when do I get paid? Oh, excuse me, when do I earn my commission? When do I earn my commission? When I connect you with that ready, willing, and able buyer, or when I sell your property, that's when we earn our commission. Again, skipping that protection period just for 1 second, I'll come back to that. When do we actually get paid? The distributions of the proceeds from the sale. We earn our commission when we connect the seller to a ready, willing, and able buyer. The truth is we don't get paid until it closes. There's the dark side of real estate. You may have transactions that you don't get paid for. You may work through the whole transaction. What if you make it to the day of closing and the seller changes their mind? They decide they don't want to sell. It is up to the firm if they want to go after the seller for that commission. You, the individual broker, cannot, because you, the individual broker, don't have an agency agreement with the seller. So whether or not the firm is going to go after the commission is up to the firm, and it very well might be a case-by-case scenario. I'm telling you right now, not many firms are in the habit of going after sellers and buyers for every single commission, because the firm doesn't want the reputation of suing sellers at the drop of a hat. Good news like that will spread fast and sellers are less likely to use. Everybody with me? So You earn your commission when you connect ready, willing, and able buyer. We don't actually get paid until it closes or the seller's failure to sell the property. And whether or not we go after the seller is going to be up to the firm. Questions on that? Do we hear that difference? Earned versus due and payable. We earn our commission when we connect the two. We don't actually get paid until it closes. The firm may also earn a fee under this protection period. Not to confuse this with the protection agreement that we just talked about. And also, you guys, on page 213, the protection period is one of those fun things that has 3 different terms that all mean the same thing. So the protection period can also be referred to as the extender clause, can also be referred to as the override clause. Everybody see that on 213? Protection period, override clause, extender clause. And what this clause, whatever you want to call it, whatever this is called, whatever this is doing, is this saying is within X amount of days, this number is up to firm's policy and should be negotiable. Within X amount of days after the expiration date, the seller enters into a contract to sell. We still may be entitled to a commission. So if I have your property listed today and it expires tonight at 11:59 p.m. and an offer comes in tomorrow, isn't there a really good chance that that offer came in through my marketing, my advertising, my efforts? Buyers don't know when properties are going to expire. You and I don't know when properties are going to expire. We don't list that date. We don't advertise that date anywhere, not even within the MLS. So if within X amount of days, the seller enters into a sales contract, I may be entitled to a commission. 2 caveats. This isn't just any buyer. I got to provide the seller with the names of specific buyers. So I have to know that the Joneses are interested in this property. And I have to tell the sellers, the Joneses are interested. And if they bring an offer within X amount of days, I'm entitled to a commission. The second caveat, once the seller lists with another firm, I'm out. Because they now have a current exclusive right to sell listing agreement with a new firm. So we expire tonight and the seller lists with a new firm tomorrow and the Joneses make an offer, the new firm's in because they have the current listing agreement. It's a small chance, but hey, it's a shot. Isn't some chance better than no chance whatsoever? So this protection period, override clause, extended clause may allow us to be to earn our commission. So fee earned versus when fee is due and payable. We also have a provision here for additional compensation. I think we see this more with buyers than we do with sellers, but anytime we're going to make more than what we agreed to here, anytime we're going to make more, maybe it's a bonus, referral, something like that. Anytime we make more than what's agreed to here, I must disclose that additional compensation to my principal. They've got to know that I stand to make more out of their transaction than what we had previously agreed to. One thing I like a whole lot, thank you forms committee. Once we're introducing, this is our first form we've looked at, isn't it? As we're going through these forms, as we start seeing these forms, whenever the need to use an additional form comes up, the forms committee points our attention to that. So if we do have additional commission, we have a form that we need to use, and specifically, They tell us to use the additional compensation form number 770. I'm a big advocate for being familiar with the forms, letting the forms help you put words in your mouth. Y'all don't need to recreate the wheel with the sellers. The conversation is right here on how you're going to get paid and when, right? It's just a matter of putting that in your own words. Don't read to the seller. Don't expect the seller to sit down and read this on their own. We need to have these conversations. But I guess my point is, y'all, we don't need to recreate the wheel. The wheel has already been created. So use the forms to help you have these conversations, be familiar, and to know when another form might be required. As we've said, our agency agreement is a two-way street, which means firms has duties, in this case to the seller, seller has duties to the firm. So we got to spell out what those duties are. The firm's duties to the seller. Well, my number one duty is to put forth my best efforts to find you that ready, willing, and able buyer, to get you an offer on acceptable terms to you. I'm going to disclose material firms of the offer. I'm going to tell the seller what the offer means, what these terms mean. Is there any information about the buyer that I may have that may affect the seller's decision? I also have a duty to disclose material facts. So we can use this to have that conversation. Other professional services, I'm going to skip this until we look at the buyer's agency agreement, because I think this comes up more with buyers. I have a duty to provide the agreement to the listing service. I have a duty to put this listing in MLS so we can use it internally for comp purposes. Appraisers use it. We use it to try to pull those comps. So we're always going to put it in MLS unless excluded. And there's a form for that. So the firm's duties, again, I'll let you guys go through and look at the detail. Another one of our musts is our non-discrimination clause. So here it is in bold, all caps. It's usually not pink. The pink highlight's just for you guys. But the agent and the firm shall conduct all brokerage activities in regard to this agreement without respect to, and here's our protected classes: the race, color, religion, sex, national origin, handicap, or familial status of any party or prospective party. Again, more on that in Unit 19. Further, realtors have an ethical duty to conduct such activities without respect to the sexual orientation or gender identity of any party or prospective party. More on that when we get to our fair housing unit in Unit 19. But we do see our must, that non-discrimination clause. We got to talk about how we're going to market the property. The firm is authorized to market the property described below on this date, and that's the marketing date. I'm telling you guys right now, it's going to be really hard to get this thing signed and listed today. Because once I get it signed, I got to figure out measurements. I got to figure out pictures. I got to figure out, does the seller need a week to paint, right? What's going on here? So it might be that my effective date, the date that we enter into this agreement, is different than the date that it actually gets marketed. And from my experience, it's tough to do it all in one day. So you need to give yourself some wiggle room. You need to give yourself an opportunity. You may hire somebody to take your pictures. You may take your pictures on your own, or maybe you hire a company to take them. You need to coordinate with their schedule, right? We need to know their availability. So there's several things going on. And this gives us the option to sign the listing agreement today, but not start the marketing, not make it available to the public until this date. We have some options with our marketing. We're either going to go public marketing, where it goes out to the public, or office exclusive, meaning we're just keeping it in-house. Some firms will allow this, some firms won't. Sometimes it comes up, sometimes it doesn't. But if you, generally speaking, if you have a seller that has an interested party They have a buyer, they may not want to list. They may call you and say, hey, I got a buyer. Remember, somebody's got to hire you. So we enter into a listing agreement. I never have to market it because we already have a buyer for this property. Sometimes that happens. We just had one end of last year. The neighbor wanted to buy the property. They don't care about the house, they wanted the land. And when the owner called us, they said, we have a buyer, we just need help through the transaction. Awesome, that's why we're here. So exclusive, office exclusive versus public marketing is who you're marketing it to. Then we kind of have, for public marketing, we kind of have some options. We have to have the seller agree to put a sign in the front yard. We have to have a seller agree to do an open house. Coming soon advertising. Coming soon advertising is kind of like the teaser. It's not on the market yet. We're just promoting it and telling you about it. It will be available for showings on this date. So we may agree to go coming soon to kind of create the hype, get the excitement out. But we can't have any showings during coming soon. Advertise other than on the internet. So in addition to putting it in MLS, what else are you going to do? Are you going to send out flyers or postcards around the neighborhood? Are you going to, I don't know. Are you going to go print media? You want to put it in the, I remember the real estate book. Used to be a lot thicker and now it's like several pages. The newspaper, right? There's other options we may go besides internet. But then I also need permission to advertise their property on the internet. I'm putting their home, making their home available to the world. Where you sleep will be available to the world. Does this make sense? So we need their permission to put this out there. If they don't want internet advertising, there's a form that we can use to eliminate that marketing. But seriously, y'all, it's 2024. It's much easier for me to sell your house if I can put it online. But with that being said, not everybody wants it. So we need their permission. Or you're going to go office exclusive. So again, two choice, public marketing or office exclusive. I'll let you guys look at that. Are we going to put a lockbox on the property? Some kind of key box or combo box or something like that on the property? The seller needs to acknowledge a couple things. First off, once I put it in MLS, from MLS, it is fed to thousands of websites. And I'm not making that number up. There are thousands of websites that can advertise your home for sale, and it all starts in the MLS. The only thing I can control is what I put in the MLS. How other websites receive that information and translate it, it's out of my control. I mean, let's talk about Zillow. Zillow is pulling listings from all of the MLSs all over the world. Not all the fields match. Not all the fields say the same thing because all MLSs are different. And it's Zillow's job to make it work as closely as they can. But there might not be fields that match. I have no control over Zillow. All I can control is what is put in MLS. And yes, you can edit your own listings in Zillow. So if you have a listing, you can go into Zillow and you can edit it. But guess what? The next time they pull the feed from the MLS, it's going to override what you did. I have no control over those third-party websites. Unauthorized use of a lockbox. Again, taking us back to seller safety. Letting them know. Only members should be accessing. Combo boxes are not near as secure as super boxes or e-boxes, we call them. So we need to have a conversation. And look, if it's a combo box, tell your seller at the end of the showings today, the end of the day, take it down and bring it inside for the night. Because once you know that combo, that kind of gives you power to go in at any time, right? So again, it's all about safety, protecting our sellers, protecting ourselves, and just letting them know there's some things that I just can't control. This warning is not highlighted, but it's always one worth mentioning. It may be a crime under federal and state laws to listen to or record an oral communication through the use of electronic devices. You can expect to see cameras when you're showing somebody's home. Again, it's 2024. I need you guys to conduct your lives as if you're on camera, because you know what? There's a really good chance that you are, especially when you enter somebody else's home. With that being said, what this warning is telling the sellers, video is okay. Audio is not. Unless you have the person's permission that you're recording, they can't have audio. So we may need to make some adjustments to those Ring doorbells, right? We may need to make some adjustments to those cameras. Video, yes. Audio, no. With that being said, when I'm working with buyers, I always caution them about what they say when they're in a house. They shouldn't have audio, but I don't trust all the sellers out there. And I tell my buyers, careful what you say. Here's the deal. I don't care if my buyers walk in the front door and go, oh God, look at that carpet. That's tacky. Whatever, that's their opinion. They're entitled to that. I don't care. What I don't want is my buyers to walk in the door and go, oh, this is it. This is my dream home. This is the one I've been looking for my whole life. I will do anything for this house. What did the sellers just sit there and hear? Money, 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 money. So I give my buyers the heads up. They shouldn't have audio, but in the event they do, I don't want them hurting their negotiating power. Does that make sense? Now, what happens is I think sometimes I do too good of a job, because I get buyers in the house that won't say a peep, and they won't say anything else until we're like well aware from the house. So maybe I exaggerate that a little bit. I don't know, but they get the point. They get the point. Be careful what they say. Earnest money, how we're going to handle the earnest money. I'm not going to talk too much about this here. We're going to talk about earnest money and something called a due diligence fee when we get into Unit 10. So we'll look at our sales contract, and we're going to talk about earnest money and due diligence. It's just right here letting the seller know whether or not we have an escrow account to deposit the earnest money, and what happens in the event that the funds are disputed. So we're going to hold off on this conversation for now. This will come up naturally in our contract unit. Then the seller's got to make some representations to the firm. Did I hear a question? So the seller needs to make some representations to the firm, and the firm needs to rely on this information, trust it for accuracy. So the seller needs to represent how long they've owned the property, their length of ownership. They are not contemplating bankruptcy. What's the access to the property? Is it a private road? We talked about private versus public roads. Is there a manufactured home on the property that's going to be included in the sale? If so, we need that VIN number. Is the property in an owner's association? Are we subject to an HOA? If so, what is that information? Seller is or is not a foreign person as defined by the Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act, also known as FIRPTA. This is an IRS thing for taxing purposes. So again, this just kind of starts the conversation. If the seller is subject to this, they'll know, by the way. And if the seller is subject to this, then we just may need to, we'll definitely want to make sure we let the closing attorney know, so they handle the tax piece of the sale properly and how that needs to be addressed. Just kind of jump starting the conversation. Is it in a flood hazard? See what I mean by a checklist? Has it ever been clad in synthetic stucco? Is there a termite bond on it? And then what are your current liens with those approximate balances? Again, if those approximate balances start adding up and adding up and adding up, my little red flag is going up. And I have questions like, can you afford to sell your home? Because sometimes if sellers are underwater, they have to bring money to closing. And like we said earlier, wouldn't we rather have this awkward conversation at the time we list it, as opposed to going through the whole thing and calling the seller the day before closing and saying, you got to bring X amount, and having the seller say, I don't have that kind of money. I can't afford to do that. If they can't pay off their liens, they can't pass clear marketable title. If they can't pass clear marketable title, they're in breach. So have these hard conversations up front. And I got a place for 1 lien, 2 liens, 3 liens. If we have more than that, probably attach a different piece of paper. Property is or is not subject to a lease, still our checklist. Property has or has not had an FHA appraisal. Are there any special assessments? May that be government special assessments or HOA special assessments? Are there any fuel tanks on the property? If so, tell us about them. I got a place for 2 tanks. So the tank is currently in use, not in use. It's owned or leased. It's above ground, below ground. What's in it? Refueling schedule. And who is the fuel vendor? So the seller's representing the information about any fuel tanks on the property. Got a place for 2 tanks. Seller has to represent if there's an off-site and or separate septic lot, boat slip, garage, parking space, etc., something off-site. They need to represent that. And any governmental compliance. Do we know that we're in any violation of maybe zoning? There's our permits, maybe something we didn't have unpermitted space. So again, that piece of it, we can just sit there and just go down the list with the seller and ask them, any governmental compliance, any off-site boat slips. Maybe you're listing a property around a lake and they don't live on the lake. They don't have lake access. Well, there's a good chance that somewhere there's a boat slip that they can use because they're in that neighborhood, that HOA. So just having these conversations helps me properly market the property. It also makes sure that we're on the same page from the beginning. Agency agreements are a 2-way street. So we looked at the firm's duties to the seller. Guess what? The seller has duties to the firm. The seller has a couple disclosures that they need to provide. So we got our residential property and owner association disclosure statement and our mineral and oil and gas rights mandatory disclosure statement. We'll look at and talk about both of those on Thursday. If the home was built prior to 1978, we will have the lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addendum. So the seller's duties include providing any required disclosures, making the property available for showings, including working in existing utilities at reasonable times. Let's be reasonable. Sellers go to bed at some point, right? And they may sleep till like 9. So we have to have conversations, you know, when is not a good time typically for you to allow showings. Maybe there's a newborn and the newborn takes naps from 1 to 3 every day. Well, that's not a good time for showings, right? That wouldn't be reasonable time for the seller. We don't want to disrupt baby's nap time. So having the conversation about showings, providing to the firm as reasonably possible. Here's any of our HOA information. So covenants, bylaws, owners association, statements, and other documents they have, surveys, deeds, title insurance policies, etc. Seller also has a duty to immediately refer to the firm all inquiries or offers that they may receive. So I get to talk to the buyers. I don't want sellers and buyers talking. They may negotiate themselves into or out of something without realizing it. So let me handle your communications. Seller's going to provide, there's that general warranty deed to convey fee simple marketable title. Seller represents that they have the right to convey, that there are no circumstances that would prohibit them from conveying. So again, where was that? Seller's duties, their duties to the firm spelled out there. I know I'm going through this fast, but you guys are going to go through and look at the highlights. Real quick, photographs and other materials. When I come in and take pictures of your home, those pictures are my property. They belong to the firm. So if you relist with another firm, the new firm needs to come in and take their own pictures. They can't use mine. That's called copyright infringement. And that's what that's saying here. And then this is really where I wanted to get today. Make a note, page 10 of the listing agreement. Page 10 of the listing agreement explains dual agency to the seller. Let the forms help you put words in your mouth. So disclosure of the information as a dual agent, the firm's role as a dual agent. I think you guys should read this. Even if you're not going to look at the listing agreement, I think you should read this to better help you understand dual agency. So the firm's role, what's the seller's role? Should the firm become a dual agent? It talks about designated dual agency, what that means. And then this is our options. Here are our choices. We have to do one or the other. We either authorize the firm to act as a dual agent, or the seller does not want dual agency and wants instead exclusive representation. It's one or the other. Either we're a dual agent, we allow dual agency, or we don't. If we say yes to dual, if people initial here, then we have the option, if the firm allows it, to take it a step further and offer designated dual agency. You can't have designated without first having an agreement to do dual. And that's why this section of the form is set up this way. It's pretty clear. If I don't have dual, then designate is not an option. One or the other. And if we agree to dual and the firm allows designated, remember, designated is not automatic. The firm has to offer it. Any good contract is going to spell out what happens if either party breaches, how we're going to handle that. So what happens if we terminate, what happens if we breach. Again, we'll let you look at that if you choose. Wire fraud warning, we'll talk more about that. And then the last piece of it, I got a place for two sellers to sign. So we got print name, signature, and any of their contact information. If you have more than two sellers, we have an additional signatures addendum. So remember, you guys, with the sellers, everybody that's on that deed and their spouse needs to show up on closing day to convey. What I'm telling you is we need to make sure we have all those people on board today on the listing agreement. Have everybody start today. If you have one spouse not willing to sign the listing agreement, my little red flag just went up. If they're not going to sign the listing agreement, what guarantees them showing up on closing day? And I need them on closing day to convey that fee simple marketable title. So we need all seller signatures. I got a place here for an entity seller, if it's a firm or an LLC. And then we have the firm. Print the real estate firm name. The firm has a license number as well. And this whole thing, another must, is going to be signed by the individual agent. And anything you sign will include your individual license number. This is very briefly introducing you to the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. If it's highlighted, it's in the syllabus. If it's in the syllabus, it's a good candidate for your exam. You will spend more time with this. We're just introducing you to it. You'll spend more time with this in post-licensing. And of course, you'll spend more time with this out in the wild, out in the real world. I want you guys, let's break it up into chunks. Has anybody ever heard the expression, how do you eat an elephant? You guys know how you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's what pre-licensing is. You're eating your elephant. Fair enough? All right, so I'm ending today. I think I owe you guys a couple minutes from Thursday. So we're going to end it today. Thursday, we come back together. We're going to keep going in Unit 8. We won't get through it. We may not even get to the math on Thursday. But I encourage you to keep looking ahead and remember to review where we've been. We're done with Unit 7. But I need you guys to keep going back and reviewing Unit 7. So always review, go back. What was Unit 3 about? I don't know. Let's go back and look in on it every once in a while. Everybody with me? And on Thursday, we'll keep going in Unit 8. Thank you guys again for your patience today. I am trying to give you a few extra minutes. I got you 1 minute today. I'll get you another minute or two on Thursday. Have a good evening. I will see you guys Thursday morning.